Chapter 593. Facing Li Yundong's mischievous gaze, Su Chan was so shy that she let out a cry and threw herself at him. She buried her head in his arms and kept punching his chest with her pink fists. She said angrily, "You're so annoying. You know it, but you still want to tease me. Is it fun?" Li Yunyang quickly grabbed her fist and said with a smile, "Don't make a fuss. This is not your physical body. You have the body of Yang spirit. You are only one step away from the Jinshin. If you hit it, something bad will happen. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. Besides, what if you alarm Ziyuan and Zhou? Su Chan was shocked and looked back like a frightened rabbit. When she turned her head, she blinked and said carefully, "Yundong, why don't we go somewhere else to talk?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "Okay, let's go out and talk." The two of them looked at each other and smiled. Soon, their Yang spirits turned into Yin spirits and flew out of Mount Tianlong. After flying out of the cave in the mountain, the two of them turned into Yang spirits again. They looked no different from ordinary people and walked hand in hand on Mount Tianlong. Su Chan breathed in the fresh air of Mount Tianlong and was in the Taoist temple where the Fox Zen school used to be. She looked around and saw that although the Taoist temple of the Fox Zen school had been empty, it was still open to the local tourism bureau. At this time there were many tourists coming and going, taking photos as a souvenir. These people saw Li Yundong and Su Chan coming hand in hand. The man was handsome and tall, with an extraordinary bearing, and the woman was beautiful and charming. They were really a pair of immortal lovers. They were all stunned for a moment. When Li Yundong and Su Chan had gone far away, they came to their senses. They wanted to take out their mobile phones to take photos, but they had already disappeared. The tourists whispered to each other about the two of them they had seen, guessing their identities and origins. However, no one could guess that the two of them were actually Yang spirits traveling, not real people's bodies. When Su Chan took Li Yundong's hand and arrived in front of the Yinyang dojo of the Fox Zen school, she looked around with a sigh and said, "Yundong, did you defeat the masters of the six sects here?" Li Yundong also looked around and saw that the place that had been damaged before had already been repaired, especially the two big copper tripods that he had thrown back and forth. The incense ash inside had accumulated a thick layer. He also sighed with emotion and said, "I used to think that these cultivators were the masters of the masters, but now it seems that they are just SOs." Su Chan looked at him with admiration and said softly, "It's a pity that I didn't get to see you drive away the six sections." Li Yundong gently stroked the girl's hair with his hand and said with a smile, "What's so good about that?" Su Chan shook her head and said, "No, at least I can be by your side to help you. Ever since you reached the foundation establishment stage, I haven't been able to help you. I've always felt very sad and guilty in my heart." Li Yundong smiled and put his arms around Su Chan's slender waist. "Don't be silly. You being by my side is the greatest help you can give me." Su Chan raised her head and said boldly and shyly, "Yundong, in fact, you know how to cultivate Jinshin further, don't you?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Don't you know it too?" Su Chan's face was flushed like a ripe apple. She said shyly in a low voice, "I just guessed and I haven't verified it. But Master seems to have also said that after reaching the Jinshin phase, the best way to make rapid progress in cultivation is through Karma Mudra." Li Yundong hugged the girl and said with a smile, "You haven't reached the Jinshin phase yet. Aren't you afraid that I'll take your Yuanqi?" Su Chan shook her head hard and said, "No. It's not easy for me to wait for you to reach the Jinshin phase. It's fine as long as you don't lose anything. I don't care. Besides, I'm a seven-tailed fox spirit now. Don't underestimate me." Li Yundong laughed and said, "How could I dare to underestimate you, Lord Fox Immortal? But my Lord Fox Immortal, how do you think we should do Karma Mudra?" Su Chan lowered her head with a red face and said shyly, "You're so annoying. Didn't you read all the cultivation classics? Why are you still asking me?" Li Yundong spread his hands and said, "How could a gentleman like me read these things?" Su Chan burst into laughter. She scratched her cheek with her fingers and said with a smile, "Shame on you. You're so shameless." Li Yundong pinched Su Chan's fingers and said with a smile, "Well, tell me, didn't you teach me Karma Mudra last time? Why don't we start with Karma Mudra first?" Su Chan rolled her eyes and said with a sweet smile, "That's good. Anyway, we are Yang spirit bodies now and it's not convenient for us to go back." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Well, let's try this Karma Mudra first." As he said this, he lowered his head and kissed Su Chan's rosy lips. Su Chan closed her eyes, opened her red lips slightly and raised her head to meet him. At this time, Li Yundong and Su Chan's Yang spirits were out of their bodies. One was the purest Yuan Yang Qi while the other was the purest Yuan Yin Qi. The mouth was one of the 7 apertures of a person. When they met, their yang qi and yin qi involuntarily leaked out of their mouths because of their passion. As soon as the yin and yang qi collided, there was an earth-shattering explosion. Li Yundong and Su Chan's yang spirits were instantly blown into pieces, turning into countless tiny golden light spots floating in the air. The tourists nearby were shocked and followed the sound. However, when they found the dojo, they saw that it was empty and there was no one there. They felt strange for a while and left one after another. After everyone had left, Li Yundong and Su Chan appeared in a remote corner. Su Chan said in shock, "Yundong, what happened just now? Why do I feel like I was blasted away the moment your power surged over?" Li Yundong's face was also full of fear. He said in a low voice, "I don't know, but fortunately, the 2 of us don't have physical bodies. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable." Su Chan shook her head like a rattle drum. "There's no reason. Even if it's a physical body, it won't explode if the 2 of us kiss. You scared me to death just now." Li Yundong frowned and said in a low voice, "Indeed. If kissing could cause an explosion, then human beings would have been extinct a long time ago." Thinking of this, Li Yundong also felt that this phenomenon was really absurd. Su Chan also frowned and thought for a moment, then said, "Is it because both of us have yang spirit bodies? But there's no reason for a yang spirit body to explode with a kiss, right?" Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he couldn't help but recite softly, "The white tiger of the western mountain is rampant, and the azure dragon of the eastern sea is unstoppable. First he must observe the 5 thieves of Tianming, then he must observe the people. The people of Min and Guofu sought a battle, and only after the battle could they see the saints. The generals must be divided into left and right armies, and I will be the guest. I advise you not to underestimate the enemy in the face of battle, lest you lose my family's priceless treasures." Hearing Li Yundong reciting these poems, Su Chan couldn't help but ask curiously, "Isn't this a poem from Zhang Buduan's Wuzhen chapter?" Li Yundong nodded. His face was still deep in thought, but his eyes were getting brighter and brighter, as if he had thought of something. He said, "Chaner, have you noticed that these lines of poetry happen to be talking about us?" Su Chan thought about these poems carefully and said, "The white tiger of the western mountain mentioned in the first sentence. Is it referring to me? The azure dragon of the eastern sea is referring to you?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "Yes, the first sentence refers to the yin qi of a cultivator, and the second sentence refers to the yang qi of a cultivator. If these 2 qis are extremely strong, once they are combined, they can turn into purple gold frost, and the purple gold frost refers to the purple gold core, which is the Niden of the Jinshin phase. But if you want to cultivate such a Niden, you have to go through a battle of yin and yang qi." Su Chan blinked her eyes and said, "I know that. But why did it explode?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Don't worry, look down. First, we need to observe the 5 thieves of Tianming, and then we need to observe the land to pacify the people. The people seek war, and only after the war can we see the sage. Do you know what these words mean?" Su Chan knew that Li Yundong was testing her. She was not a fool. After thinking for a moment, she said, "Does this mean that we should formulate a method suitable for our own physical conditions to fight according to the situation of our own bodies?" Li Yundong nodded and praised, "Yes, that's what it means. The Yin Talisman scripture says that there are 5 thieves in the sky, and those who see them will prosper. Zhang Gua, a great cultivator of the Tang dynasty, once commented that the 5 thieves are life, matter, time, work, and spirit. What I mean is that only when we have nurtured these 5 to their best condition and achieved the right time, place, and people, can we fight with yin and yang. Only in this way can we see the sage. Otherwise, it will beat advising the king not to underestimate the enemy before the battle, lest he loses his priceless treasures." Su Chan's face suddenly fell and she said bitterly, "No way. Will there be a problem with little dual cultivation? Don't you want to live?" Li Yundong shook his head and said, "The higher the cultivation, the easier it is to have problems. If it weren't for the fact that both of our yang spirits have been cultivated to the top level, I'm afraid that we would have lost our family's priceless treasures." Su Chan pouted unhappily. For a moment she was speechless. Seeing her unhappy face, Li Yundong couldn't help but smile and say, "Don't be unhappy. In fact, I have a way." Hearing this, Su Chan immediately beamed and said, "What way?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "It's very simple. Treat me as an enemy, and then the 2 of us will have no problem kissing each other." Su Chan's eyes suddenly widened and she asked in surprise, "What's the meaning of this?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "It's very simple. The reason why there was an explosion just now must have been because the 2 of us were in love, so that the yin and yang qi became extremely strong. The yin and yang qi suddenly collided violently, of course causing an explosion just like when the chaos was first formed. But the emotion is because of the heart, and the heart causes the qi and blood of our bodies to accelerate so that the speed of the jinqi flow will also accelerate. When the jinqi flows faster, our yang spirits will also become stronger. Su Chan suddenly understood and said, "That's right. When my master took me away, he said that when the emotion is aroused, the desire will be aroused, and the desire will mean the end of cultivation." Li Yundong blinked at Su Chan and said with a smile, "So, if you treat me as an enemy, then you won't be aroused and there will be no problem." Su Chan was curious and excited. She giggled and said, "Well, I seem to understand. Let's try again?" As the saying goes, the sea can accommodate all rivers, and the wall can stand thousands of feet high, and the wall can be strong without desire. Li Yundong closed his eyes slightly and cleared his mind. When he opened his eyes again, they were clear, without the slightest emotion or desire. Su Chan also calmed her mind and adjusted herself to the state of mind as still as water. At this time, Li Yundong lowered his head and kissed her. Their lips touched gently, and at this time, there was no violent explosion. Su Chan also felt a strong yang qi blowing over her face. She could barely maintain a state of no desire for a period of time, but in front of her was her lover. It was more difficult than ascending to heaven for her not to be aroused, not to be aroused, not to be aroused, and not to be aroused. In addition, foxes were sentimental creatures, and they were the most easily aroused. Once they were aroused, their love was stronger than gold. After being kissed by Li Yundong like this, how could the little girl control herself? For a moment, her yin qi suddenly grew stronger. However, Li Yundong had been in a calm state. At this time, his yang qi was instantly overwhelmed by Su Chan's yin qi. In an instant, Su Chan's yin qi produced a strong suction force, fiercely sucking Li Yundong's yang qi into her body. The second update on the first. Oh my god, it's finally up. It's not easy. I'm exhausted. Chapter 594. All of a sudden, Li Yundong felt that Su Chan's yin qi had become very strong. It was like a huge whirlpool sucking in all of his yang qi. Go to the internet. Soak in the book bar. Li Yundong was shocked and subconsciously controlled his qi to resist it. However, as soon as he resisted, the two qi of yin and yang immediately intertwined. As soon as the two qi of yin and yang came into contact, Li Yundong clearly felt an unstable force rapidly expanding between him and Su Chan, like a fireball that was constantly growing and would explode at any time. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and he soon remembered the poem in the Wuxia chapter written by Zhang Buduan. Fire is born of wood and hides its edge. If you don't study it, don't attack it by force. If you want to subdue Lord Jin, you have to subdue him. Lord Jin was originally the son of the master. He was sent to live in the West Neighbor School. He recognized him and called him back to the West Neighbor School. What this poem said was that one's yang qi was originally hidden in one's yin qi. If one didn't know the method and forcefully practiced it, he would get into trouble and harm himself and others. If one wanted to solve this problem, he had to find the secret of practicing Jinshin. The secret was that the yang energy that he lacked could be found in the house of the Western neighbor girl, and the yin energy that the Western neighbor girl lacked could be found in the house of the Western neighbor girl. If the two of them became in-laws, they would be able to get what they needed. But even though he understood this truth, he still couldn't understand how his Yuan Yang Qi and Su Chan's Yuan Yin Qi would explode once they collided. How could he solve the current situation where his Yuan Yang Qi and Su Chan's Yuan Yin Qi collided? Li Yundong was a little worried, but he suddenly heard a few tourists walking on the other side of the wall next to the Taoist hall. They said with a smile, "Oh, you invited me out to play, so you don't have to be so polite. Besides, it's only right for me to give you a gift. What's yours and mine? Isn't what's mine yours? We're all family. Why are you so polite?" Although Li Yundong was trying the Jinshin dual cultivation with Su Chan at this time, his mind was calm and his ears were listening in all directions. He clearly heard the words of the tourists on the other side of the wall. Suddenly his heart skipped a beat. He suddenly remembered a poem in Zhang Buduan's Wuxia chapter. When a general is used, he must divide the left and right armies. If he is the master, I will be the guest. Although there was a yin and yang difference between his and Su Chan's qi, it was just the difference between the left and right hands. Why should we be the host and guest? If she wanted to suck it, then let her suck it. Thinking of this, Li Yundong smiled in his heart and let go of his control. His powerful and majestic Yuan Yang Qi suddenly rushed toward Su Chan. As soon as Li Yundong stopped resisting, their yin and yang qi were no longer entangled, and his yuan-yang qi naturally flowed into Su Chan's body. Su Chan was originally a yuan-yin body. As soon as a powerful yuan-yang qi rushed into her yang spirit body, she immediately shivered all over. The intercourse of yin and yang was originally the happiest thing in the world. Although Li Yundong and Su Chan were only in Jinshin, when their pure yin and yang qi merged together without any resistance, it was like two men and women who had just awakened to love. They snuggled up to each other and smelled each other's scent. Although they were not really happy, they were secretly in love. For a moment, Su Chan felt that her head was gloomy and light. She was so happy that she could hardly distinguish between things. Like a child waiting to be fed, she tried her best to absorb this powerful yuan-yang qi. But after sucking for a while, Su Chan suddenly became alert. She exclaimed in her heart, "Oh no! Why did I suck Yundong's yuan-yang qi? Damn it!" Thinking of this, Su Chan suddenly became anxious. She wanted to immediately return Li Yundong's yuan-yang qi, but as soon as she moved her mind, Li Yundong seemed to know what she was thinking and said, "Don't worry. Follow the qi of the great Zhou and let my qi wander around your body. Naturally, it will come back after a round." At this time, Su Chan was still talking to Li Yundong, but she clearly heard his voice echoing in her mind. She was shocked and widened her eyes, thinking, "Is this the skill of voice transmission?" Li Yundong said with a smile, "Fool, we are now in the intercourse of yang spirit qi, so we can sense each other's thoughts." At this time, Su Chan opened her eyes and glanced at Li Yundong. She saw that he was kissing her and looking at her with a smile in the corner of his eyes. The girl suddenly felt happy and winked at Li Yundong. Although the intersection of yin and yang qi was an extremely dangerous thing, and the slightest carelessness could lead to qigong deviation, Zhang Buduan would not have advised the later generations of cultivators in the poem to advise the emperor not to underestimate the enemy in the face of battle, lest he lose his family's priceless treasures. But the two of them were talking and looking at each other. They didn't feel any danger at all. They only felt that it was naughty and fun. While secretly playing, they secretly made love. What they didn't know was that this coincided with the cultivator's free and easy state of mind. For a moment, their qi quickly swam through Su Chan's yang spirit body without any resistance. When this qi swam back again, Li Yundong clearly felt that there was an extra cold Shenin qi in his qi, and Su Chan also felt that there was an extra faint yuan-yang qi in her body, as if there was a looming fire in an ice cave, while Li Yundong was like a clear spring in a dry and hot desert. After an unknown period of time, Li Yundong and Su Chan reluctantly separated. After their lips parted, they looked at each other and Su Chan suddenly burst into laughter. Li Yundong smiled and said, "What are you laughing at?" Su Chan said with a smile, "Just now, you were smacking your lips and staring at me with your eyes wide open. You were so silly." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "Really? Silly people have silly luck. If it weren't for that, I'm afraid that the two of us would have been blown up again." Su Chan looked at Li Yundong with admiration and said, "Yundong, you're so amazing. You taught yourself. No one taught you, but you learned it all." Li Yundong laughed, blinked mischievously at Su Chan, and said, "Do men and women still need to be taught this kind of thing?" Su Chan giggled and said, "You're so naughty. This is dual cultivation and cultivation. Do you think everyone can do it?" Li Yundong looked at Su Chan with a smile. He saw that her originally beautiful face was now a little more pink. It was obvious that she had obtained his yuan-yang qi, and the aura all over her body had become a little more enchanting and mature. Li Yundong couldn't help but think of the time when he had first met the little girl. He sighed in his heart and said, "I wonder what the little girl will look like when she cultivates to the realm of the nine-tailed celestial fox in the future. How beautiful will she be?" But as soon as Li Yundong thought of this, he couldn't help but think of Yan Fang's doubts and questions in front of everyone at the Taoist assembly. Every time the nine-tailed celestial fox appears, the world will be in chaos. But if Su Chan cultivates to the nine-tailed celestial fox, will there also be chaos? Li Yundong couldn't help but be shocked. He thought to himself, is this a prophecy or a curse? Or is it the law of the cultivation world? Could it be that the little girl will never cultivate to the realm of the nine-tailed celestial fox for the rest of her life? No, my little girl is very obedient. How can there be any trouble if she stays by my side? Even if she cultivates to the nine-tailed celestial fox, it will be fine. Su Chan saw that Li Yundong's face was suddenly full of thought and he didn't say a word. She couldn't help but ask, "Yundong, what are you thinking about?" Li Yundong came to his senses and said with a smile, "Nothing. I just remembered that when we were together in the past, you said that when we succeeded in our cultivation, we would go to visit the beautiful rivers and mountains all over the country. Now that we have succeeded in our cultivation, do you want to travel around? Su-chan was overjoyed, but she soon hesitated and said, but, what about Sister Zhou-chin and Sister Ziyuan? Do we leave them alone? Li Yundong smiled and said, our yang spirit bodies will go out for a walk. We'll be back soon. It won't take long. Su-chan thought for a moment, then nodded with a smile on her face. She held his hand and the two of them disappeared in an instant. Li Yundong and Su-chan flew into the air hand in hand. Su-chan leaned against Li Yundong's side and said with a sweet smile, Yundong, where are we going to play? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, we'll go wherever you want to go, okay? Su-chan blinked her eyes, made a face at Li Yundong and said with a smile, you stole my line. That's what I wanted to say. Li Yundong was happy and said with a smile, then let me think. Where should we go to play? Let's go to the mountain where you used to cultivate, okay? Su-chan immediately shook her head like a rattled drum. No, I lived there for too long when I was a child. I know where the flowers and plants are even with my eyes closed. It's so boring. Let's go somewhere else to play, okay? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, then shall we go to Mount Heng? Is that also a place where there are outstanding people? Su-chan smiled and said, when we return from the 5 mountains, we don't look at the mountain. When we return from Mount Huang, we don't look at the mountain. Yundong, didn't we just go to Mount Huang? Li Yundong scolded with a smile, you're really difficult to deal with. We didn't go to Mount Huang for sightseeing last time. Why don't we go to Mount Huang again? Su-chan quickly shook her head and said, don't go. That place is terrible. As soon as I go there, I will think of Su Ling and those cultivators who died on Tiandu Peak. Li Yundong spread his hands and said, this won't do and that won't do. Tell me a place. Su-chan thought for a moment and said, it's better to go to a fun and exciting place, okay? Li Yundong saw that although Su-chan was already a 7-tailed fox spirit, and the Jinshin divine sex had made her temperament more mature, she was still a young girl after all. He couldn't help but laugh and said, a fun and exciting place? Su-chan said with a smile, yes, for example, an amusement park? Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The two of us are now great cultivators. How can we go to an amusement park to play? Are you kidding me? Isn't this a little too childish? Su-chan pouted and said, how is it childish? Li Yundong pretended to think seriously for a while, then suddenly said, by the way, I got it. Su-chan was delighted and quickly asked, what? Li Yundong said with a smile, a fun and exciting place? Then there's only one. Su-chan grabbed Li Yundong's hand and kept shaking it. Tell me. Li Yundong said solemnly, Mount Longhu? Su-chan was so scared that she almost fell from the sky. She was stunned and said, Mount Longhu, the ancestral court of Jingyi school? How is that fun? Li Yundong said with a smile, in the past, we were bullied too much by Jingyi school. Now we're going to have some fun and play hide and seek. Isn't it fun and exciting? The last time I struck Mount Longhu with lightning, it was very fun and exciting. Su-chan looked at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open, and excitement gradually appeared in them. She clapped her hands and said with a smile, well, if you're not afraid, then I'm not afraid either. Let's go to Mount Longhu now. Li Yundong laughed and waved his hand. Let's go. Let's go to Mount Longhu. Chapter 595. The flying speed of the Yang spirit was extremely fast. Even if it was 1,000 miles away, it was only a matter of a moment. Li Yunyang and Su-chan only flew for a while before they arrived at the distant Longhu mountain in Jiangxi. Watch net. 7 km. The last time Su-chan set foot on Mount Gizao, one of the holy lands of Taoism, she was still in awe and trepidation. This time, when she arrived at Mount Longhu, which was known as the supreme holy land of Taoism, she looked at the magnificent scenery under her feet with excitement. Although it was late winter, Mount Longhu was still lush and verdant. The summit was shrouded in clouds and mist, as if it was an 800-mile immortal abode, a 3,000-hectare paradise. Su-chan took a deep breath and sighed from the bottom of her heart. As expected of the first ancestral court of Taoism. Just taking a breath here makes me feel better than cultivating for 30 days. Li Yundong smiled faintly. Mount Longhu is rich in spiritual qi. It can be said to be one of the best in the world. Cultivating here will naturally yield half the results with twice the effort. Su-chan said enviously, I really envy Jingyi school for having such a good Zhu Ting. If only our Fox Zen school had such a good Zhu Ting mountain. Li Yundong smiled and said, don't be silly. Isn't Mount Tianlong good? As the saying goes, a gold or silver nest cannot compare to our poor nest, isn't that so? Su Chan giggled. She put her arm around Li Yunyang's arm and said very obediently, "Anyway, as long as my master is there, I'll follow him. I don't care whether Mount Lingshan is in Mount Lingshan or not." Li Yundong laughed, pinched Su Chan's nose lovingly and said, "You're so sweet. Let's go down." When Su Chan followed Li Yundong down, she found herself at the door of a Taoist temple. She was surrounded by jungle and ancient trees. She couldn't help but ask curiously, "Yundong, what kind of Taoist temple is this?" Li Yunyang smiled and said, "This is the Taoist temple of the Linggong sect in Ziyuan. You haven't been here yet, have you?" Su Chan's eyes lit up. "Sister Ziyuan's Taoist temple? I have to take a good look." Li Yundong smiled and said, "I know you haven't seen it, so I brought you here to play today." Su Chan blinked. "Yundong, you've been here before?" Li Yundong nodded and said with a smile, "That's right. Do you remember the last time we went to Mount Gizao, when you flew out of your house and bumped into me in Ziyuan?" Su Chan suddenly said, "Ah, I remember. You seem to have told me that you and Sister Ziyuan came here that night?" Li Yunyang nodded and said with emotion, "That night, Ziyuan taught me the 5 thunder magic method here. At that time I had just reached the Yangshan phase. I didn't expect that in a flash I would already be in the Jinshan phase." Su Chan also sighed with emotion. "Yes, Sister Ziyuan is really a good person. When she was hunting me I thought she was a big bad guy." Li Yundong smiled and tapped the tip of the little girl's nose. "At first she thought that you were a little fox demon who did all kinds of evil." Su Chan giggled. Fortunately, the weather cleared up after the rain. Otherwise, wouldn't it be like the flood had washed away the Dragon King's temple? One family would no longer recognize one family. When Li Yundong heard this, he couldn't help but be moved. He thought to himself, "A family. Who exactly is Ziyuan to me? Family and friends? Confidant? Cultivation companion? Teacher who taught me? Benefactor?" Li Yundong clearly knew that although Su Chan had introduced him to the path of cultivation, it was Ziyuan who had really made him a cultivator. It was this gentle, noble, elegant and virtuous woman who had silently helped him push him to new heights on the path of cultivation. Such a person she. Who on earth was she to him? Li Yundong was lost in thought when Su Chan, who was beside him, suddenly said, "Yundong, in a while, it will be the day of Sister Ziyuan's succession ceremony. At that time we have to help her. She has helped us so much." Li Yundong came to his senses. He smiled slightly, stroked Su Chan's cheek and said softly, "This is one of the reasons I came to Mount Longhu." Su Chan was stunned and asked curiously, "Are you here for the ceremony of Sister Ziyuan's succession of the Linggong sect? But there's still more than a month to go." Li Yundong smiled and said, "The Jingyi school is the biggest variable in whether Ziyuan can successfully take over as the leader of the Linggong sect. If they want to stop her, there will be endless twists and turns. But Zhang Ling and the others of the Jingyi school have always been against us. I have never known what the leader of the Jingyi school is thinking, so I came here this time to meet the leader of the Jingyi school. It can be considered as throwing a stone to find out the way, and using peaceful means before resorting to force." Book under Shabaranish first post. Su Chan said curiously, "But I heard from my master that the leader of the Jingyi school had been in seclusion for 10 years. Has he come out of seclusion now?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "When I was chatting with Ao Wushuang in private, she mentioned that during the Battle of Tiandu Peak, several masters of lightning retribution had appeared near Tiandu Peak. 2 of them were from the Jingyi school, and one of them was the leader of the Jingyi school. Since his yang spirit has come out, it means that he may have come out of seclusion." Su Chan was shocked and said tongue-tied, 2 masters of lightning retribution? The Jingyi school accounted for 2 of the 5 major lightning retributions? Li Yundong smiled and said, "Otherwise, why is the Jingyi school the #1 Taoist sect in the world?" Su Chan suddenly felt a little scared. She looked around in panic and said in a low voice, "Yundong, the masters of lightning retribution are not to be trifled with. Let's go, shall we?" Li Yundong laughed and scratched Su Chan's cheek. "You're a 7-tailed fox spirit. Why are you afraid? Weren't you full of confidence just now?" Su Chan was a little embarrassed and said shyly, "It hasn't been long since I became a 7-tailed fox spirit. Besides, I'm afraid I'll be a burden to you." Li Yundong laughed and said, "We're not here to make trouble. If we can't beat them, we can run away." Su Chan immediately became proud. "That's good. When it comes to running away, I'm the best." Li Yundong scolded with a smile, "You're not ashamed but proud. Your master is so powerful. How dare you say that? Aren't you afraid of embarrassing her? Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong and said with a smile, I'm not afraid. Master was not as powerful as me before. She only became powerful after meeting Wang Yuanshan. Li Yundong laughed and took Su Chan's hand, saying, let's go and visit the leader of the Jingyi school. Let's see if we can turn a big deal into a small one and a small one into nothing. Even if we can't resolve it, we can still find out the details of the Jingyi school. When the time comes, we can be prepared. Su Chan saw that Li Yundong spoke casually, but she knew very well in her heart that Li Yundong was no different from breaking into a dragon's pool or a tiger's den. If the Jingyi school really had evil intentions, it was very likely that the two of them would be sent to their deaths and would most likely not come back. However, Li Yundong was still calm and composed. This kind of confidence, knowing that it was impossible, was based on his super strong fighting strength and talent. Yundong was already so powerful in the Yangshan phase. Now that he had reached the Jinshan, how powerful would he be? Could he beat a master of lightning retribution? Thinking of this, Su Chan couldn't help but become more curious. The fear in her heart gradually disappeared and she became excited. Along the way she kept talking to Li Yundong. Along the way they passed through the 99 peaks and 24 rocks of Mount Longhu. Along the way there were divine wells, elixir pools, flowing springs and waterfalls. They were bright, beautiful and graceful. There were strange peaks and rocks on both sides of the river, and the bamboo forest was verdant. It was like a fairyland. Su Chan sighed when she saw it, and Li Yundong also felt relaxed and happy. Unknowingly, the two of them had already arrived at the ancestral court of the Jingyi school. The Taoist master's mansion appeared in front of them. At a glance, Li Yundong saw that the Taoist master's mansion was located in the north facing south, facing Shangqingshi, with its back against North Mount Hua, Shangqing Palace in the east, and the main peak of Mount Longhu in the west. It was surrounded by a forest of eucalyptus trees, towering ancient trees and dense shadows. It was solemn and mysterious. In front of the gate of the Taoist master's mansion was a palace-like building with a hanging mountain. It was tall and majestic, standing in front of the stream. There was a plaque with the words Taoist Master's Mansion of the Han Dynasty hanging on it. The huge stone pillar next to it was hung with a couplet. Li Yundong looked at it and saw that the first couplet was written, Immortal guests in the Qilin Hall. The second couplet was written, The home of the Prime Minister in Mount Longhu. These few words were written in flamboyant and majestic style. Between the lines there was a deep sense of history and pride. The momentum of the number one Taoist sect in the world instantly rushed over. Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh and say, They are immortals in heaven and prime ministers on earth. They deserve to be the only major sect in China in the past 2,000 years that can be compared with the Kong family. They deserve to be the number one sect in the Nan Kingdom. At this time, Su Chan saw the palace of the Taoist master's mansion with double eaves and red pillars, red walls and red doors, luxurious architecture, richly carved beams and painted rafters, and magnificent gold and jade. She couldn't help but feel awe in her heart and didn't dare to laugh loudly anymore. She just opened her eyes wide and curiously looked at the core of the Jingyi school, the ancestral court. Although it was winter at this time, the ancestral court of the Jingyi school was extremely prosperous, and there was a continuous stream of tourists. Li Yundong and Su Chan followed the tourists through the gate of the mansion. When they arrived at the second gate, Li Yundong and Su Chan saw that there were magnificent halls on both sides of the corridor, such as the Shentan Hall, the Law Records Bureau, the Commissioner's Office and the Teaching Hall. The architecture of these two gates was the same as that of the mansion gate, slightly lower in scale and level than the first gate. There were 3 pairs of gates and 6 door gods, majestic and lifelike. The 2 pillars in the middle of the gate were also hung with a couplet. The first couplet was written, The Tao is high, the dragon and the tiger are low, and the second couplet was written, Virtue is heavy, ghosts and gods admire. Su Chan was fascinated. She saw that the tourists around her were going to the Jade Emperor's Hall of the 3 Gates, burning incense at the incense altar in front of the hall to worship the gods. Su Chan looked around and felt that the doors, windows, beams, pillars and eaves of the surrounding buildings were all exquisitely carved. The colors were gorgeous and magnificent, and the environment was solemn, quiet and elegant. Everywhere was full of the style of a rich and powerful family. It could be called the Deep Sea Marquee Gate. As soon as they entered the gate, they felt as if they had entered the vast sea. It was unfathomable. Su Chan couldn't help but lean closer to Li Yundong, as if she was afraid that he would disappear in the next second. She took Li Yundong's arm and asked in a low and nervous voice, Yundong, where is the leader of the Jingyi school? Do you know? Li Yundong said with a smile, I don't know either. Su Chan was stunned. Ah, you don't know either? Then what are you doing here? Li Yundong smiled and said, it doesn't matter if I don't know. I can ask. As he spoke, he saw a Taoist in a Taoist robe not far away with his back facing him. He pulled Su Chan forward and asked, hello, may I ask where your leader is? Can you introduce him to me? The Taoist turned around and saw Li Yundong and Su Chan at a glance. He was shocked and cried out involuntarily, it's you? My wife is sick and in the water. I served her by her bed. I owe everyone one update. 2 updates today will not be less and there will be one more update later. Chapter 596. This Taoist was a Taoist nun. Although she was wearing a Taoist robe and a Taoist crown, it couldn't hide her graceful figure and delicate face. Many tourists took pictures of her as a souvenir. Go to the internet. _book_bar. When the Taoist nun heard someone talking to her behind her, she was stunned for a moment. Then she sneered to herself and thought, do you think you can see our leader whenever you want? But in next to no time, the Taoist nun turned around and saw a handsome and tall man standing in front of her, and there was even an extraordinarily beautiful young girl leaning against him with a sweet smile on her face. She instantly turned pale with fright and blurted out, it's you? Li Yundong took a closer look and saw that the person standing in front of him was none other than Zhou Ping, who had always been against him. Zhou Ping looked at Li Yundong in shock and then at Su Chan. She couldn't help but say in surprise and anger, how dare you two come here? Do you think there's no one in our Jingyi school? B*****. After that, she subconsciously reached into the wide sleeve of her Taoist robe. Li Yundong immediately leaned forward and grabbed Zhou Ping's wrist with his hand. He said with a faint smile, do you want to fight here? Look around. Zhou Ping looked around and saw that there were many tourists around. Many people were even taking pictures of them with their mobile phones and cameras. Zhou Ping was extremely angry. She gritted her teeth and said, since you know, why did you still come? How dare you barge in without knowing what you're capable of? Li Yundong smiled and said, this is a tourist attraction and I'm also a tourist. Why can't I come? Zhou Ping glanced at Li Yundong's 5 fingers that were grabbing her wrist. She struggled hard but felt that his 5 fingers were like iron pincers. No matter how much she used her Jinqi to struggle, she couldn't move at all. Zhou Ping said angrily, do you think you can do whatever you want just because you have a high cultivation quotient? Let go of me. Li Yundong let go of her hand and smiled slightly. I don't dare. I just want to see your leader. Zhou Ping rubbed her wrist and glared at Li Yunyang angrily. Our leader is in seclusion. He won't see you. Li Yunyang chuckled and said, in the Battle of Tiandu Peak, 2 lightning retribution masters of your Jingyi school went to watch from the side. One of them is the leader of your Jingyi school. If you say that he is still in closed-door training, I don't believe it. Zhou Ping's eyes widened and she couldn't help but shout angrily, nonsense. If our sect leader came out of seclusion, how could my master not know? If my master knew, I would know too. You're spouting nonsense and slandering me. What is our sect leader going to Sky Capital Peak for? With his cultivation, does he still need to fight for Diyu and Jindan? Li Yundong laughed. I didn't say that. You said it. I'm looking for your sect leader because I have some personal matters to discuss, not because of some Diyu and Jindan. I would be very grateful if you could help me notify them. Zhou Ping sneered and said, I told you that our sect leader is in seclusion. Even if he is not in seclusion, the sect leader will not see people like you who help the wicked and associate with demons. As she said this, she glanced at Su Chan, her eyes full of contempt and disdain. Su Chan did not want to be outdone and made a face at her. Li Yundong saw that Zhou Ping's attitude was very rude, but he didn't get angry. He smiled slightly and said, I don't believe that your sect leader is in seclusion. You don't even want to notify him. Obviously you are taking revenge in public. If you don't want to help me notify him, then I will shout directly. As he said this, Li Yundong took a deep breath and was about to shout loudly. Zhou Ping was so scared that her face turned pale. She knew that Li Yundong's aura was not only majestic but also long. When the Desanxian tea shop had opened, Li Yundong's divine dragon absorbing water had shocked her a lot. If this guy shouted, the video of Mount Longhu would go viral on all the major video websites in China the next day. Although the Jingyi school was now very powerful, it was still very low-key in the mortal world, for fear of attracting more attention from the government. If Li Yundong made a scene, the consequences would be unimaginable. Zhou Ping grabbed Li Yundong angrily and said through gritted teeth, Well, well. You win. I'll go notify you. As she said this, she stomped her feet and turned around to walk back. After taking 2 steps, she turned around worriedly and said angrily, "Don't play any tricks." While she was talking, she saw 2 Taoists coming over and said with a smile, "Eldest Shiji, what are you talking about? What tricks are you talking about?" Zhou Ping looked at Li Yundong and said, "You came at the right time. Help me keep an eye on them. Don't let them walk around. I'll be back soon." After that, she turned around and left. _book_bar. These 2 Taoists were mostly in their 20s, extremely young. Both of them had thick eyebrows and big eyes. Their eyes were bright and their foreheads were plump, showing that they had excellent cultivation potential. Li Yundong nodded secretly and thought to himself, as expected of the number 1 Taoist sect. 2 random cultivators have such aptitude. Not bad, not bad. However, the 2 young Taoists misunderstood Zhou Ping's meaning and thought that Li Yundong and Su Chan were here to make trouble. When they saw Su Chan's strong fox demon chi, they couldn't help but be shocked and look at each other. One of the young Taoists took a step forward, glared at Su Chan and shouted in a low voice, "How dare a little fox demon be so presumptuous in Mount Longhu? Do you want to die?" Su Chan was shocked and completely forgot that she was already a 7-tailed fox spirit. She subconsciously hid behind Li Yundong and looked at the 2 Taoists timidly. As the Taoist spoke, he was about to step forward and take Su Chan down, but he saw Li Yundong standing in front of him like a towering mountain, looking down at him like an insurmountable peak. The Taoist was shocked by Li Yundong's momentum and couldn't help taking a step back for a moment. He looked at Li Yundong warily and asked, "Who are you?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "The leader of the Fox Zen school, Li Yundong." The Taoist was shocked. "You are Li Wu. Li Yundong?" He subconsciously almost called out Li Yundong's nickname, but halfway through his words he realized that it would be too arrogant, so he changed his words. He glanced at Li Yundong, then turned to look at the Taoist beside him and whispered, "Shixiang, what should we do?" His Shixiang frowned secretly and whispered, "What are you afraid of? Does he dare to be presumptuous in Mount Longhu? Besides, he said that he is invincible. Li. Do you really think that he is invincible? Let's see if he is really invincible." The Taoist nodded slightly. With the support of his Shixiang and on the home ground of his own sect, he had become much bolder. He said to Li Yundong, "Since you are the leader of the Fox Zen school, that's even better. Let me see if you are worthy of your name." After that, he flicked his sleeves. Under the cover of his wide Taoist robe, his fingers pinched a finger seal in his sleeve, and a talisman was hidden in his palm. He pointed it at Li Yundong's chest like lightning. Just as Li Yundong and the 2 Taoists were entangled, Zhou Ping had already rushed into the private house angrily. At this time there were no tourists in the private house. Zhou Ping looked around and shouted, "Is there anyone here? Hurry up and ask someone to come out." Not long after she finished speaking, a beautiful woman in a yellow dress came out of the house. This girl was carrying a sword on her back. She had a sweet appearance and a yellow hairpin on her head. Her eyes were full of spirit as if they could speak. Soon another woman came out behind her. She looked exactly the same as her and also carried a sword on her back. The difference was that she was wearing a light blue dress and a blue hairpin on her head. Her eyes were quiet, revealing a sense of reservation and shyness. Who else could it be but Deng Yu and Deng Jiao? Zhou Ping was stunned and asked curiously, "Why are you here? Where are the others?" Deng Yu said with a smile, "Eldest Shiji, the others have gone to do their homework. We are on duty today." Zhou Ping sneered and said, "How can these guys let you 2 newcomers be on duty? Besides, you are the sword souls of the Sanju formation. How can you do this kind of work? Humph, they must have bullied you again, right?" Deng Yu said with a smile, "No, we asked for it. You saved our lives, so it's not a big deal to do a little more." A gentle smile appeared on Zhou Ping's face. She shook her head and said, "Hey, you 2 little girls are so kind-hearted. They are taking advantage of you like this, but you are speaking up for them. Hee, I really don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing for the Sanju formation to choose you 2 soft-hearted little girls as the sword souls." At this time, Deng Jiao also came forward and said softly, "Eldest Shiji, it's really because Shixiang and Shiji are too busy with their homework that we took the initiative to come and be on duty. We feel very sorry for eating and drinking here for free these days, so if we don't do something we won't be able to sleep peacefully." Zhou Ping smiled and said, "Well, do me a favor. Go to the side peak of the West Mountain and find Shirshu Zhang Kongyun. Tell him that someone from the Taoist Master's mansion has come to make trouble. Ask him to come and help." When Deng Yu and Deng Jiao heard this, they were shocked. Ever since they had been resurrected in the Taoist master's mansion, they had regarded the people of the Jingyi school as their saviors. These days they had also learned about the Jingyi school and knew what kind of position it occupied in Chinese Taoism. Deng Yu said in shock, "Someone dares to come to our Taoist master's mansion and act presumptuously? Are they tired of living? Eldest Shiji, where is this person? Let us help you deal with him." Zhou Ping laughed and said, "You? Forget it. You two are powerful in the Sanju formation. Out of the Sanju formation I can deal with you with one finger. And this guy can deal with me with one finger. Do you think you can deal with him?" Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked at each other. Deng Jiao covered her mouth and exclaimed, "Is this bad guy so powerful?" Zhou Ping snorted. "So what? This is Mount Longhu. My master is not here now. Only he can deal with this guy. Don't delay. I still have to go back and keep an eye on Song Wei and Zhou Yuan. These two guys usually like to be competitive. Don't cause any trouble." After that, Zhou Ping turned her head and was about to leave, but as soon as she turned around she seemed to have thought of something. She turned back and said, "By the way, if Shishu refuses to come, you can say that he said last time that as long as this guy takes the initiative to come to him, he will take action. Now it's time for him to fulfill his words." Deng Yu asked curiously, "Eldest Shiji, who is this guy you're talking about?" Zhou Ping looked a little anxious. She said impatiently, "Why are you asking so many questions? Hurry up and go. Every minute you delay is an extra minute of danger. Do you think this is a joke?" Deng Yu and Deng Jiao didn't dare to say anything more. They responded in unison and quickly went out of the door, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Chapter 597. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao flew all the way to a Taoist temple on a side peak. They saw that the Taoist temple in front of them was much shabbier than the Taoist temple of the Taoist master's mansion, and it was even worse than the Taoist temple of the Linggong sect in Ziyuan. Go to see. $. Deng Yu stood in front of a low and dilapidated earthen-walled Taoist temple door, patted the rusty iron ring on the wooden door, and shouted in a crisp voice, Shibuozhang, are you there?" Not long after, a crisp girl's voice came from inside. After a while, the wooden door was opened with a squeak. A young and pleasant face poked out and looked at Deng Yu and Deng Jiao curiously. The girl was Zhang Lufang. She asked curiously, "Who are you? Why are you looking for my master?" Deng Yu stuck her head out and peeked through the crack in the door. She smiled and said, "I'm Deng Yu and this is my sister, Deng Jiao. We were ordered by Shiji Zhou Ping to look for Shibuozhang Kongyun." Zhang Liufang's eyes lit up. She opened the door with a squeak and said happily, "Are you the sword souls of the three Ju formation? You're so beautiful, and are you twins?" Deng Jiao blushed a little at her praise, but Deng Yu accepted it all with a smile. She said, "Yes, we are twins. Is Shibuozhang here? We want to ask him for help." Zhang Lufang opened the door and went forward to pull Deng Yu and Deng Jiao with great enthusiasm. While curiously observing their differences, she pulled them inside. As they walked, she said with a smile, "My master is inside. Why are you looking for him?" Deng Yu said with a smile, "We're not looking for him. It's Shiji Zhou Ping." Zhang Lufang asked with a smile, "Shiji Zhou Ping? Isn't she on duty today? Why is she looking for master? Isn't she afraid that master will stink her?" Deng Yu and Deng Jiao both asked curiously, "Stink?" Zhang Lufang pointed to a short red wall not far away with a smile and said, "Yes, my master is planting vegetables. He's using manure to make fertilizer. It's so smelly. If you don't mind the smell, you can go and find him. I don't want to go." As she said that, she seemed to have smelled the stench and quickly pinched her nose with her hand. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked at each other. The two of them were also girls who liked cleanliness. When they heard this, it was as if the air suddenly smelled and they hesitated for a moment. But at this moment, a loud shout came from behind the wall of the Taoist temple, "Hey you big nose, let go of me, let go of me." Zhang Lufang immediately burst into laughter. She covered her mouth and said, This foreign devil is tormenting master again." While Deng Yu and Deng Jiao were puzzled, they saw Zhang Kongyun turn around the corner of the wall angrily, holding a wooden dipper in his hand. A burly man with blonde hair and blue eyes was hugging his thigh tightly and kept shouting, Master, take me as your disciple." This man was Hardadef. Zhang Kongyun had the divine power of Jinshin, but he didn't dare to use it on Hardadef. He was afraid that if his Jinshi surged, it would aggravate Hardadef's injury. Book bar, Zhang Kongyun dragged Hardadef for a few steps, only to see that Hardadef was like a sack, hugging his thigh tightly with both hands. He was dragged all the way, but he refused to let go at all. Zhang Kongyun was so angry that he laughed. He raised the wooden dipper in his hand and threatened loudly, "Hey, if you don't let go, I'll pour manure on you." Hardadef had a silly smile on his face. He raised his head and opened his mouth, looking like he was waiting to be fed. Zhang Lufang, who was standing to one side, was so disgusted that she almost vomited. She looked at Hardadef with a broken face and said loudly, "Hey, you can't eat that thing. Why are you opening your mouth? Aren't you afraid that Master will really pour it in? He can do it." However, Hardadef seemed to turn a deaf ear to her. His mouth was wide open, and he was shouting as if what Zhang Kongyun was holding was a delicacy in the world, and his face was full of expectation. Zhang Kongyun's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He glared at Hardadef angrily for a long time before he put down the wooden dipper in his hand and said angrily, "Well, I admit defeat. I don't dare to splash it on you, okay? Let go. Let go." Deng Yu and Deng Jiao had been in Mount Longhu for a long time, so they naturally knew that Zhang Kongyun was a very low-key but extremely powerful great cultivator of the Jingyi school. When they saw that Zhang Kongyun was in such a sorry state because of a blonde foreigner, they couldn't help laughing in horror. Zhang Lufang also kept snickering. She giggled and said to Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, "This foreigner is a little crazy. I picked him up. This guy is fun. He's been tormenting Master a lot these days." Seeing that Zhang Kongyun was talking to him, Hardadef immediately grinned and said, "Master, take me as your disciple." Ever since Zhang Kongyun had brought Hardadef back, his life had become a mess. This big-nosed man seemed to have endless energy, pestering him all day long to become his disciple. However, at this time Hardadef's chi was in a mess, and he didn't dare to do anything to him for fear of aggravating his injury. Now he was in a difficult position to get off. Zhang Kongyun looked at Hardadef with a headache. He couldn't help complaining loudly to Zhang Lufang, "Hey, you wicked girl, are you just going to watch the fun? This big-nosed man was normal just now. Why is he acting up again? Come and help me get rid of him." Zhang Lufang laughed out loud, made a face at Zhang Kongyun and said, "Master, I can't help you either. He's hugging your thigh so tightly that I can't pull him away. He's very strong." Zhang Kongyun said angrily, "I don't care. You can use any other means. Anyway, get him away as soon as possible." What a scandal. Zhang Lufang giggled and said, "Master, since he wants to be your disciple so much, just accept him as your disciple." Zhang Kongyun glared at her and said, "Nonsense. How can I accept a foreigner as my disciple?" Zhang Lufang said with a smile, "What does it matter? Anyway, you're just dealing with him. Maybe if you accept him as your disciple, he won't pester you anymore." Zhang Kongyun thought for a moment and still shook his head. No, how can I joke about accepting a disciple? It's not a child's play." Zhang Lufang shrugged at him and said, "Then I can't help you." As she said this, she turned to Deng Yu and Deng Jiao and said, "Did you see it? Master can't go out like this now. Otherwise, if a Jinshin master of the Jingyi school was hugging his thigh and refused to let go, wouldn't people laugh their heads off if they saw him like this?" At this time, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked as if they wanted to laugh but didn't dare to. They all held back their laughter and their shoulders trembled a little. Deng Yu held back her laughter and said, "Shibuozhang, Shiji Zoping really has something urgent to do. Why don't you go and have a look first?" Zhang Kongyun rolled his eyes and said, "How can I go like this? Can you think of a way?" Deng Yu suddenly bit her lip in embarrassment. Deng Jiao, who was beside her, suddenly said softly, "Shibuozhang, Zoping said that you promised Shibuozhang Ling before that if that person really came to Mount Longhu, you promised to help him." Zhang Kongyun was stunned for a moment. "I promised Shiji Zhangling? What did I promise her?" As he said this, he turned his face and looked at Zhang Lufang in confusion. "What did I promise her? What person?" Zhang Lufang thought for a moment and said tentatively, "She didn't mean Super Li, did she?" Zhang Kongyun suddenly remembered, and his eyes burst out with a bright light. "Li Wudi? How dare this guy come to Mount Longhu? Hey little girl, is this guy Zoping is talking about?" Deng Yu said crisply, "I don't know. I think so. Shiji Zoping seems to be very afraid of him." Zhang Kongyun chuckled and said, "Zoping has always been arrogant. She only thinks highly of Zhang Tianhe and doesn't care about the rest of the people. It must be this guy who can make her so afraid. Well, I also want to meet him. Since this guy dares to come to me, I'll go and have a look." As soon as he moved, he felt his feet sink. He saw that Hardadef was still looking up at him with a silly smile on his face and kept shouting, "Master, master. Oh my god, I almost forgot that there was such a burden by my side. Zhang Kongyun suddenly felt a headache coming on. He said angrily, I'm not your master. Let go of me. Seeing this, Hardadef's face was full of horror. He hugged her even harder and shouted, Master, don't leave me behind. Zhang Lufang couldn't help laughing. Master, just accept him. It's fun to have a foreign shirdi. Zhang Kongyun's face was full of pain. He tentatively said to Hardadef, Hey, why don't I temporarily accept you as my disciple for a month? After a month, you won't be my disciple anymore. What do you think? Zhang Lufang was so angry that she laughed. Master, you're deceiving yourself. How can he understand what you're saying? How can you bully a fool? However, Hardadef's face was suddenly full of joy. He nodded quickly and said, Okay, master. After that, he immediately let go of Zhang Kongyun's thigh and banged his head on the ground. Seeing that he had finally let go, Zhang Kongyun immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He pointed at Hardadef and said, In the future, you're not allowed to stand behind me all the time and then suddenly hug my thigh. This is the first rule of the sect. Do you understand? Hardadef nodded like a chick pecking at rice. Yes, I understand, master. Zhang Kongyun nodded with satisfaction and said, Then I'm going out now. You stay here and guard the house by yourself. Do you understand? Hardadef was shocked. He immediately hugged Zhang Kongyun's thigh again and shouted, Master, take me with you. This time Zhang Kongyun was prepared. How could he let Hardadef catch him? He quickly flashed and appeared outside the Taoist temple in an instant. He shouted at Deng Yu and Deng Jiao, Why aren't you going? Deng Yu and Deng Jiao seemed to have woken up from a dream and followed Zhang Kongyun out in a daze. Zhang Lufang also ran out with a smile, looking back at Hardadef. She saw that Hardadef had run after Zhang Kongyun for 2 steps before falling to the ground and crying like a child. Zhang Lufang burst out laughing, shook her head and waved at Hardadef with a smile. Hey Big Nose, take care of the house. We'll be back soon. Because there were many tourists on Mount Longhu at this time, Zhang Kongyun and the others did not dare to fly in the sky. They just shuttled back and forth on the mountain path. Deng Yu asked Zhang Lufang as he ran, Shiji Zhang Lufang, who is this invincible Li you're talking about? Is he very powerful? Finally someone calls me Shiji. I'm so happy. After you come, I'm no longer the youngest disciple of the Jingyi school. Zhang Lufang giggled, but when she mentioned Li Jiandong, her face suddenly showed admiration. She nodded and said, Of course this guy is powerful. It's a pity that you didn't go to the Taoist assembly. Invincible Li defeated the masters of all the major sects at the Taoist assembly alone, and finally defeated Tachibana Wakako, the witch of Xinyan Tantrism. He saved the face of our Chinese cultivation world without any bloodshed. How could he not be powerful? Think about it, if he wasn't powerful, the cultivation world would have given him a nickname, Invincible Li. Deng Yu asked curiously, But I see that Shiji Zoping seems to hate this guy very much. But why don't you hate him, Shiji Zhang Lufang? Zhang Lufang sighed and said, That's because Shiji Zoping likes Zhang Tianhe. She has been secretly in love with him for a long time, but Zhang Tianhe has a crush on Jinren Ziyuan. However, Jinren Ziyuan hangs out with Invincible Li all day long. They seem to have a good relationship. Alas, what a complicated relationship. It seems that Shiji Zoping is destined not to be happy. Deng Yu asked again, What about you, Shiji Zhang Lufang? Do you like him? Zhang Lufang said without hesitation, Yes. It was one thing for Li Wudi to be good at fighting, but what was even rarer was that he was an affectionate and righteous man. As the saying goes, it's easy to find a priceless treasure, but it's hard to find a lover. If I had such a boy who liked me, I would be so happy. Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked at each other and became more and more curious about Invincible Li. Deng Yu tentatively said to Zhang Lufang, Then, Shiji Zhang Lufang, can you take us to see this Invincible Li later? Zhang Lufang giggled and said, Don't always call me Shiji Zhang Lufang. It's weird. Just call me Lufang. Just now you called me Shiji and made me very happy. Deng Yu also smiled and nodded. Well, Lufang. Shiji, I'll follow behind you and have a look later, okay? I remember that Sherbua Zhangling doesn't allow us to wander around. If she knows that we're going to the main courtyard of the mansion, I'm afraid she'll be angry. Zhang Lufang was in a good mood. She giggled and said, Don't be afraid. I'm here. It'll be fine. The 3 little girls chattered all the way and followed Zhang Kongyun quickly. Soon they arrived at the Taoist master's mansion in Mount Longhu. At this time, the Taoist master's mansion was surrounded by tourists. A group of people curiously pointed at the roof of the Taoist master's mansion. Zhang Lufang took a look and immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. There was a Taoist hanging on each side of the archway of the mansion. The two Taoists were hanging motionlessly like clothes. Zhang Lufang was stunned and said, "What's going on?" At this time, Deng Yu and Deng Jiao also exclaimed, "Who did it? It's too much." Zhang Lufang stammered, "It can't be Super Li, can it? I'm afraid that only he has the courage and ability to do such a thing." At this time Zhang Kongyun was also slightly angry. He snorted and looked at a boy in the field. Zhang Lufang saw a handsome boy and an extremely beautiful girl standing together. The two of them were talking and laughing as if there was no one else around them. They were surrounded by Taoists of the Jingyi school. These Taoists glared at them, but they didn't dare to make a move. Zhang Lufang immediately pulled Deng Yu and pointed, exclaiming, "Look, that's Super Li." Deng Yu and Deng Jiao looked in the direction of her finger and suddenly trembled. Deng Yu blurted out, "Isn't he Li Yundong? He's Super Li?" Zhang Lufang said curiously, "Yes, Li Yundong is Super Li. Do you know him?" Deng Jiao was also shocked. She said softly, "He's my classmate." Well, there are indeed a lot of things to do recently. In late May, I have to go to Nanjing to participate in the Youth Creation Conference organized by the Provincial Writers Association. As a new member of the Provincial Writers Association, I also have to report. Of course, I don't dare to forget that I owe everyone one chapter. In addition, I will stay up late to write the second chapter for today. I really don't dare to owe any more. In the future, I will only be busier. If I owe any more, I really won't be able to make up for it. As for when to make up for the one chapter that I owe, I can only say, I will try my best in the next few days. Alas, I have to apologize to everyone. Chapter 598. When Zhang Lufang heard Deng Jiao's words, she was so surprised that she couldn't close her mouth. She said dumbfoundedly, What? Li Yundong is your classmate? You used to. Deng Yu said straightforwardly, "Of course, I used to be a freshman at Tiannan University, and Li Yundong was my senior. Go to the net." 7 KOM. Zhang Liufang's face was full of shock. She thought to herself, the two sword souls chosen by Shibui Zhangling still have the memories of their previous lives? It can't be, right? Logically speaking, the sword souls of the Sanju formation should have removed the memories of their previous lives. How could this be? Although Deng Jiao was more introverted, she was more sensitive. She quickly noticed Zhang Liufang's abnormality and couldn't help but be a little vigilant. Deng Yu didn't notice it at all. She looked at Li Yundong in a daze and said with emotion, "I didn't expect that he was a cultivator and he was so powerful." As she spoke, Deng Jiao was about to step forward and shout at Li Yundong. However, as soon as Deng Yu moved, she felt someone gently pulling her. Deng Yu turned her head and saw that her sister, Deng Jiao, was looking at her and shaking her head slightly. Although Deng Yu was confused, she subconsciously shut her mouth because of her understanding and trust of her sister. She rolled her eyes quickly and said to Zhang Lufang, "Shiji Lufang, what should we do now?" Although Zhang Lufang was full of doubts, she temporarily suppressed these thoughts. She shook her head and said honestly, "I don't know. Let's wait and see. Master is here. It'll be fine." At this time Zhang Kongyun also walked to the field. When the surrounding Taoist priests saw him, they immediately breathed a sigh of relief and whispered, "Well, Shibui Zhang is here." Zhang Kongyun frowned and walked up to Zhou Ping. He looked around and asked in a deep voice, "What's going on?" Zhou Ping gritted her teeth and looked at Li Yundong. "How would I know? As soon as I came back, I saw these two guys hanging from the top. Damn it, Li Yundong is too arrogant." Zhang Kongyun usually acted like an old urchin, but at this time his face was full of anger. He shouted in a low and dignified voice, "Nonsense. Why didn't you let them down? Are you just going to let people watch the fun like this? Aren't you ashamed?" Zhou Ping said with an ugly expression, "How? There were so many people watching. It was a few meters tall. Are you going to fly up in front of everyone?" Zhang Kongyun said angrily, "Then how did Li Yundong hang them up?" Zhou Ping's face became more and more ugly after being scolded by Zhang Kongyun. She said, "How would I know? As soon as I arrived, I saw these two fellows like this." Zhang Kongyun snorted angrily and said to Zhou Ping, "Ask two people to go to the side and prepare to pick them up." Although Zhou Ping didn't know what Zhang Kongyun was going to do, she knew that her Shirshu's magical power was amazing and his spiritual power was great. Naturally, he had a way to get these two people down. She quickly turned her head and whispered a few words into the ears of the two Taoist priests beside her. The two Taoist priests nodded and quickly ran to the sides. Then they looked at the two corpse-like Taoist priests. Zhang Kongyun didn't seem to have much luck. He glared at Li Yundong and stomped his foot slightly. This stomp seemed inconspicuous, but the mountain suddenly shook violently. The tourists around suddenly panicked and shouted, "Earthquake, earthquake!" The two Taoists who were hanging on the eaves were shaken and immediately fell down. The two Taoists below caught them firmly. They checked the pulse of the two people and immediately felt relieved. They nodded to Zhou Ping. Zhou Ping also breathed a sigh of relief. She turned to Zhang Kongyun and said, "Shu, you are amazing." Zhang Kongyun snorted noncommittally. "Are they all right?" Zhou Ping sneered and said, "Even if Li Yundong had 10 guts, he wouldn't dare to kill the people of our Jingyi school." Zhang Kongyun smiled disdainfully and said, "Is there something wrong with your head? He dared to hang the people of our Jingyi school in front of the world." After that, he ignored Zhou Ping, who was ashamed and angry, and whose face was alternating between green and white. He walked up to Li Yundong, looked him up and down and asked, "Are you Li Yundong, who is known as Invincible Li?" Since Zhang Kongyun appeared in the field, Li Yundong's attention had been focused on him. He smiled, cupped his hands and said, "I dare not call myself invincible. I am Li Yundong. May I know your name, senior?" Zhang Kongyun saw that Li Yundong's smile was gentle and his tone was modest. He didn't look like a surly person who could humiliate a big sect like Jingyi school in front of so many people. Zhang Kongyun frowned and asked, "My name is not important. What's important is, how dare you be so presumptuous here? Do you know where this is?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Of course I know. This is the Taoist Holy Land, the ancestral court of Jingyi school. It can be called the center of Taoism in the world. It is equivalent to Jerusalem of Christianity, Mecca of Islam, and Wutai Mountain of Buddhism in the Central Plains." Zhang Kongyun said with an angry face, "Since you know, how dare you be so arrogant? You humiliated our sect in front of the secular people? Do you really think that you are invincible in the world and that there is no one in our Jingyi school?" In the face of Zhang Kongyun's stern questioning, Li Yundong said with a smile, "Senior, if it were you, you would come to Mount Longhu sincerely and ask to see the leader, but you would be maliciously rejected. Not only that, but you would also be provoked by the Taoist priests of your sect, and they even took the initiative to attack you. What would you do?" Zhang Kongyun was stunned. Is there such a thing? At this time, Su Chan, who had been leaning against Li Yundong, also said, "Yes, I can testify. That tall Taoist is bad. He sneaked up on my Yundong." When Zhang Kongyun saw her, his face immediately darkened. He snorted coldly in his heart and said, "Humph, fox spirit, how can I believe what you say? Wang Yuanshan was bewitched by fox spirits like you, and that's why he ended up like this." Zhang Kongyun's face was gloomy. He didn't even look at Su Chan and said in a deep voice, "Jinrenli, even if it was the people of our Jingyi school who attacked first, do you have to slap our faces like this? Is this also the demeanor of a leader?" Li Yundong said with a smile, "I wanted to talk to them nicely, but I repeatedly tolerated them. In the end, they became insatiable, so I had no choice but to hang them up high, in case they didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth and pushed me again and again." As Li Yundong spoke, he suddenly changed the topic and said, "Moreover, this time I came here with great sincerity. I wanted to resolve the previous conflict with the Jingyi school and asked to see the leader of the Jingyi school. But I didn't expect that the Jingyi school would treat their guests like this. Is this the way big sects treat their guests? I saw a couplet hanging at the foot of the mountain which said, 1,000 prayers, 1,000 answers, everything is sincere, everything works. Excuse me, I came here with such sincerity. Why did you close the door to me like this?" Zhang Kongyun saw that although Li Yundong's words were easygoing, there was a hidden needle in them. It was very difficult to deal with him, and he was not a person who was good at arguing. Zhang Kongyun frowned and said, "Our leader is indeed in seclusion. I can assure you of this. Moreover, once our leader comes out of seclusion, there will definitely be Dragon Tiger Chi. It's impossible that no one in the Jingyi school will notice it." Seeing that Zhang Kongyun was speaking seriously, Li Yundong couldn't help but wonder, is the leader of the Jingyi school really in seclusion? Then the master of lightning retribution who came last time. Is it just a young spirit clone of the leader of the Jingyi school who is in seclusion? No way. If even a young spirit clone has the power of lightning retribution, then, isn't that too terrifying? Moreover, who is the other lightning retribution master of the Jingyi school? Li Yundong thought for a moment, sighed slightly and said, "In that case I was rude. If the leader of the Jingyi school comes out of seclusion, I'll visit him again." Seeing that Li Yundong and Su Chan wanted to leave, Zhang Kongyun immediately took a step forward and blocked Li Yundong's way. He said in a deep voice, "What, you want to leave?" Li Yundong raised his eyebrows and said tit for tat, "What? Do you want me to stay?" Zhang Kongyun said in a deep voice, "Junrenli, you humiliated our Jingyi school in front of so many people. If I don't get back at you, what will the cultivators in the world think of us?" Su Chan, who was standing to one side, couldn't help but shout, "You provoked us first." Zhang Kongyun glared at Su Chan and shouted in a low voice, "How dare a little fox spirit be so presumptuous in Mount Longhu? Shut up." Zhang Kongyun's low roar contained the Jinshin Yuanqi of the Shenmen sect. The thick and pure Jinqi in his body rushed out, causing the air around him to tremble violently. The demon qi all over Su Chan's body was shaken by Zhang Kongyun's Shenmen sect's Yuanqi, and she was immediately shaken to the point that her true form was almost revealed in front of so many people here. Fortunately, when she had been cultivating with Li Yundong before, there had already been a small amount of Yuanyang qi in her body. Just as the Yin qi in her body was about to break out of her shell, this Yuanyang qi immediately grabbed the Yuanyang qi in Su Chan's body like a tree root, pulling the impetuous Yuanyang qi in her body bit by bit and bringing it down again. In an instant, a few faint fox skin patterns appeared on Su Chan's body, and the fox eyes in the corner of her eyes flashed. Su Chan hadn't expected that Zhang Kongyun would almost force her to reveal her true form just by shouting angrily at her in a low voice. She was shocked and immediately hid behind Li Yundong in horror. She said in a trembling voice, "Yundong, this guy is so powerful." Zhang Kongyun saw that Su Chan had only revealed her true form a little, and then she immediately returned to her original state. He was also shocked and said with a sneer, "It turns out to be the seven-tailed fox spirit. No wonder you dare to come to Mount Longhu. How dare you? Apart from the mystical silver fox and Ao Wushuang, you are the third fox spirit who dares to set foot on Mount Longhu. Humph, today you come but you can't go." Zhang Kongyun and Wang Yuanshan used to have a very close personal relationship. The two of them were best friends, but because of the appearance of Ao Wushuang, the friendship between the two of them began to break. Zhang Kongyun begged Wang Yuanshan to turn back and let him give up Ao Wushuang, the fox spirit, and return to the Shenmen sect. However, Wang Yuanshan resolutely betrayed the sect and left, and their friendship came to an abrupt end. When Wang Yuanshan had been lured back to Mount Longhu by Yan Fang's scheme, it was Zhang Kongyun who had used himself as bait to deceive Wang Yuanshan. Even Wang Yuanshan had been caught by Zhang Kongyun himself. Zhang Kongyun still clearly remembered the scene when his best friend broke off his friendship with him. That scene made him take it to heart, so that he had a strong hatred and rejection of the fox demon in his subconscious. In Zhang Kongyun's opinion, if it hadn't been for Ao Wushuang's appearance, Wang Yuanshan would have probably become the #1 cultivator in the world. Wang Yuanshan's future could be said to have been buried in the hands of Ao Wushuang. Although Zhang Kongyun didn't know that Su Chan was also Ao Wushuang's disciple, he hated Su Chan as well. He attacked Su Chan regardless of his identity. But as soon as Zhang Kongyun moved, Li Jiandong stood in front of Su Chan and said with a sneer, "Senior, it's not appropriate for a cultivator like you to attack a little girl, is it?" Seeing that Li Jiandong was standing in front of him, Zhang Kongyun immediately sneered and said, "Just in time, I also want to see how good you are. Since you just killed a disciple of our Jingyi school, now I'll let you have a taste of being killed." As he spoke, he took a deep breath, and the sound of his joints cracking came from all over his body. He stamped his feet, and 2 deep footprints appeared on the green bricks under his feet like cheese. The footprints went all the way up to his ankles. Mount Longhu seemed to have been stepped on by a giant. It shook violently, and the palaces and pavilions on the mountain peak shook with a loud clang. A terrifying force surged out of Zhang Kongyun's thin body and rushed toward Li Jiandong. He sneered and said, "Get up. I'm so tired. I'm going to sleep." Chapter 599. Li Jiandong hadn't expected that Zhang Kongyun, who was as thin as firewood, would have the power of a monster. He only felt as if he was being pinched in the palm of a giant, and a huge force was pulling him up from the bottom up. Li Yunyang was shocked. He immediately sank his qi into his dantian, and all the jinqi in his body burst out in an instant. All the hair on his body stood up with a swish, and a faint golden shell quickly appeared on his body. However, it was broad daylight now, and under the sunlight, this faint golden light was almost invisible. Watch net. 7kom.com. Li Yundong's breath sank, and his whole body pressed down like a huge rock weighing 10,000 kilograms. A martial arts practitioner who often practiced the lower body was often unable to move even 10 oxen. However, the strength of a cultivator far exceeded that of an ordinary martial arts practitioner, especially Li Yundong's qi, which was vigorous and condensed. This sinking was like a sea-stabilizing needle, firmly rooted to the ground. Zhang Kongyun just wanted to throw Li Yundong up and make him look bad, but he didn't expect that Li Yundong would be so difficult to deal with. He didn't even throw him. The young boy in front of him was as motionless as Mount Tai. A sharp light flashed in Zhang Kongyun's eyes. He was not convinced, so he stimulated his true essence again. His bones crackled like fried beans and his skinny body swelled up little by little. His thin muscles slowly swelled up, and the dried blood vessels under his skin bulged up like balloons. They were like small snakes twisting crazily. Li Yunyang knew that there were many elderly cultivators in Taoism who, in order to fight against the laws of nature, tried their best to ensure that their bodies would not be consumed. They would choose to keep the most essential parts of their bodies: essence, qi, and blood. These three parts were all hidden in the 2 kidneys, 2 livers, and 2 hearts of the human body. If they could save more blood, they would save more. As a result, even though they all looked like old people, once the essence and blood stored in their kidneys, livers, and hearts suddenly burst out, their bodies would also go through a huge change. It was like a withered tree that had been given a new lease of life, and they would regain their youthful vigor. At this time, Zhang Kongyun's muscles swelled and his body became bigger. Li Yunyang's heart immediately trembled. He knew that the other party was going to use all his strength. Zhang Kongyun took a deep breath and pressed his thumb against Li Yundong's huku acupoint. With this press, Li Yundong suddenly had an illusion. It was as if under the pressure of the other person's finger, his whole body seemed to be shorter, and his feet involuntarily went soft, making him want to fall. Even if it was a ferocious tiger or a giant elephant, he could press them to the ground with a single press of his finger. Jinshin real essence was originally condensed and vigorous, firm and powerful. The spirit virtual realm was only at the primary level of Jinshin, but with the indestructible Jinshin, he was almost immune to all magic arts and magic treasures. It could be seen how terrifying the real essence density of Jinshin protection was. But Zhang Kongyun compressed such a powerful and dense Jinshi into the size of a thumb. What did this mean? Amazing. Li Yundong was shocked. Zhang Kongyun had condensed all the Jinshi in his body into one point in an instant, and all of it was gathered on his thumb. At this time, not to mention pressing the huku acupoint, even if it was pressed on a steel plate, it could make a hole like pressing cheese. This press not only had the subtlety of martial arts moves, but also the horror of cultivation power. If Li Yundong was pressed by Zhang Kongyun, not to mention that he had not compressed Jinshin Jinshi into a little bit, even if he used the power of ordinary Jinshin to pinch Li Yundong a little harder, Li Yundong would not be able to bear it. The huku acupoint was also known as the higu acupoint, and the higu, as the name suggested, was the higu. It was also called the higu acupoint. The gap between the 2 mountains was also called the higu. The meaning of the higu was that the qi and blood of the large intestine gathered here. This acupoint belonged to the spleen and stomach, and the spleen was a hematopoietic organ. Once the huku acupoint was pinched, with Zhang Kongyun's powerful Jinshi, he could instantly control the qi and blood of Li Yundong's whole body, and even block the temporary hematopoiesis of his spleen. Cultivators often cultivated their internal organs, so their 5 viscera and 6 bowels were incredibly powerful. In the past, when Li Yundong had a drinking competition with Zhao Yuzhen, he had swallowed several bottles of white wine in one breath. He had relied on his strong liver function to detoxify and detoxify. In the Desanxian, he had used the magic skill of the divine dragon absorbing water, relying on his strong lung function. Most of the time, Li Yundong could burst out with monstrous power in an instant. That was because his liver function could store far more blood than ordinary people, and his spleen could produce dozens of times more blood than ordinary people in an instant. The power of a cultivator's Jinshi came from the flow of qi and blood. The explosive power almost completely depended on the flow speed and capacity of qi and blood. But if the flow and production of qi and blood were controlled by someone, it was equivalent to being pinched by someone at the source. No matter how powerful Li Yundong was, he would be captured. What's more, Zhang Kongyun's press also contained the terrifying power of Jinshin. This ordinary press immediately made Li Yundong feel Zhang Kongyun's powerful and exquisite fighting strength. His moves were not necessarily extraordinary, but they were aimed at the vital points, and the pressure was so strong that it was suffocating. This Zhang Kongyun is at least in the intermediate phase of the Jinshin, the immortal Jinshin. Li Yundong immediately became respectful. He didn't dare to be careless. With a flip of his wrist, he straightened his index finger and poked at Zhang Kongyun's palm. But the two of them moved extremely fast. It looked like Li Yundong had raised a finger, waiting for Zhang Kongyun to hit it like a nail. Although Li Yundong couldn't condense all the Jinshin Jinchi in his body into a place as small as a thumb like Zhang Kongyun, his Jinchi had been cultivated hard in Tibet. It was much thicker and more condensed than that of ordinary cultivators. At this time he was in the Jinshin phase, so his power could not be underestimated. In particular, the position of Li Yundong's finger was precisely the Laogong acupoint on Zhang Kongyun's palm. The Laogong acupoint was also known as the Ghost Road acupoint. In traditional Chinese medicine, ghost was opposite to heaven and referred to the earth. Road referred to the meaning of the road. The ghost road meant that the qi and blood in the acupoint came from the earth, corresponding to the Yongquan acupoint. In traditional Chinese medicine, there was often a healthcare method of rubbing the Laogong acupoint and then pressing the Yongquan acupoint. It meant to connect the qi of the earth together and achieve the goal of promoting the human body's qi and blood to flow more smoothly. The Laogong acupoint, like the Hoku acupoint, belonged to the spleen. Moreover, it belonged to the Jian pericardium meridian of hand. The flow of the human body's qi and blood often passed through here. When many people were nervous, their palms would sweat. The place where they sweated was the ghost road, which was the Laogong acupoint. If Li Yundong's poke hit, not only would Zhang Kongyun not be able to press Li Yundong's Hoku acupoint, but his own qi and blood would have a big problem. Although he had a Jinshin to protect himself, Li Yundong also had a Jinshin. Although it was only at the primary level, as long as he hit the right place he could break the surface with the point. It was very common for a primary Jinshin to break the protection of an advanced Jinshin. Zhang Kongyun saw that Li Yundong's reaction was astonishingly fast. In the blink of an eye he not only dodged his attack, but also immediately gave him a taste of his own medicine. In turn he immediately hit him with a point to break the surface. Zhang Kongyun secretly admired him and thought, "You really deserve your reputation." His nickname, Invincible Li, wasn't just for show. But, if you think that's all I have, then you're wrong. Zhang Kongyun thought quickly. He turned his wrist and grabbed Li Yundong's wrist. Taking advantage of the movement of Li Yundong's wrist, he sent out another fierce force and pulled him up. Li Yundong had put all his strength into dealing with Zhang Kongyun's move. He couldn't help but feel a little weak under his feet, and his foundation was not as solid as before. At this time, when he was suddenly pulled by Zhang Kongyun, his feet immediately loosened and he was about to fly up again. Li Yundong immediately made a handprint with his other hand and quickly shouted a mantra in a low voice. A big handprint slapped toward Zhang Kongyun's face. Zhang Kongyun saw a golden palm in front of him in the blink of an eye. He was shocked and did not dare to dodge. He was afraid that if he dodged, Li Yundong's palm would hit the building behind him. That would make a big noise. Zhang Kongyun immediately retreated quickly. He flicked the sleeve of his Taoist robe and put the big handprint into his sleeve. Li Yundong's tyrannical big handprint suddenly sank into the sea like a clay ox, and there was no more movement. The continuous fight between Zhang Kongyun and Li Yundong only lasted for 2 or 3 seconds. Before the surrounding tourists could react and look at the two of them had already separated as if nothing had happened. Because the movements of the two of them were relatively subtle, the surrounding tourists did not notice that the two of them had been fighting back and forth for several rounds. Zhang Kongyun looked at Li Yundong with slight anger in his eyes and said in a deep voice, "Jinren Li, it's not easy for you to have such a cultivation at such a young age. You should respect yourself." Li Yundong saw that the tourists around had noticed him and Zhang Kongyun at this time. He didn't want to entangle with Zhang Kongyun anymore, so he said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "Thank you for your guidance, senior, but I'm free to do whatever I want, and I don't need you to teach me. This time I came here to plead for Ziyuan. I hope you won't target her in the future. If there's anything, just come to me. If your leader really hasn't come out of seclusion, when he does, please convey my meaning to him." Zhang Kongyun's eyes narrowed slightly. He had just tested Li Yundong's strength. If the two of them really fought, they would definitely not be able to tell the outcome without fighting fiercely. In the current situation, it was better not to entangle with them anymore. Otherwise both of them would lose. Zhang Kongyun nodded slightly. He glanced at Su Chan coldly and shouted in a low voice, There is still more than a month before the inauguration ceremony of the leader of the Lingong sect. I'm looking forward to fighting with you. However, Jinren Li, don't think that you are a Jinshin master just because you have cultivated to the Jinshin phase. When the inauguration ceremony comes, I will tell you what a real Jinshin fight is. Finally, I give you a piece of advice. Don't associate with this kind of witch. Otherwise, you will regret it. Li Yundong smiled faintly. He took Su Chan's hand and said, "The one thing I don't regret in my life is falling in love with her." With that he stopped talking. He turned around and took Su Chan's hand and walked down the mountain. At this time, Zhang Kongyun's eyes flashed as he stared at Su Chan's figure for a long time. Then he turned around and left. Regardless of the other Taoist priest's greetings, he quickly walked to the backyard of the mansion. When he arrived at a place where there was no one, he used his kung fu and quickly ran to a peak of Mount Longhu. When he ran all the way to the top of the mountain, he came to a huge rock that was polished like a mirror and stuck with a few seals on it. Zhang Kongyun slowly stopped. He stretched out his hand and gently stroked the 3 words deeply engraved on the rock. Wind, dust, stone. Zhang Kongyun gently stroked the surface of the rock, and his expression suddenly became very lonely. He slowly sat down beside the wind, dust, stone and said as if to himself, "Old friend, guess who I saw today? Hey, it's the 7-tailed fox spirit. Don't worry, it's not your Ao Wushuang, but it's very similar to her. It should be her disciple. You've been here for a long time, so you must miss her very much, right? Alas, you have such a high cultivation talent, why can't you see through it? Since ancient times, no one who has been with a fox spirit has a good ending." Zhang Kongyun sighed for a while. Only the sound of the wind on the surrounding mountains responded to him. Zhang Kongyun shook his head and said, "You still don't want to see me? Forget it, I won't force you. However, today I met another cultivator whose cultivation talent is not inferior to yours. Just like you, he is infatuated with a 7-tailed fox demon. I think very soon you will have a companion. When the time comes, you won't be lonely. By the way, in a month or so, it will be the day when your disciple Ziyuan takes over as the head of the Lingong sect. Aren't you worried? Don't worry, I will help her. However, I can't decide the affairs of the Jingyi school alone. Now that I think about it, 4th Shixiang and 7th Shixiang will soon come out of seclusion. I don't know how their cultivation quotients are." As he spoke, Zhang Kongyun stood up, patted the dust off his buttocks and said, "I came in a hurry today, so I didn't bring you wine. I'll bring it to you another day. I'll go first." After Zhang Kongyun finished speaking, his figure flashed and disappeared in an instant. A long time after he left, a tall man with long black hair suddenly appeared in his previous position. This man had his back to the wind, dust, stone, and his eyes were dreamy. He looked at the secular world at the foot of the mountain like an otherworldly immortal. He was silent for a long time, and a meaningful smile slowly appeared on the corner of his mouth. Chapter 600. Li Yundong and Su Chan went all the way down the mountain. When they were out of the sphere of influence of Mount Longhu, Su Chan breathed a sigh of relief. She patted her chest and said in shock, "We came here for nothing. I was almost scared to death. I thought I was going to be caught by them." Li Yundong chuckled. "With me here, do they think they can catch you? Dream on." Su Chan said worriedly, "But I'm afraid of getting you into trouble." Li Yundong pinched the tip of Su Chan's nose with a doting expression and said with a smile, "Silly, you have to have confidence in yourself. You are a 7-tailed fox spirit." Su Chan made a face at him. "I've been a burden for too long. I can't get used to it." Li Yundong laughed, patted the little girl's round and perky buttocks and said with a smile, "Don't play tricks. Let's go back. Watch net." "How was it?" "It was exciting and fun, right?" Su Chan let out a cry and covered her buttocks. She pouted and said, "It's quite exciting, but it's not so fun. Besides, we've made a wasted trip." Li Yundong smiled. "A wasted trip? Not necessarily. At least I know that there is such a powerful Jinshin master in the Jingyi school." As he said this, Li Yundong pondered for a moment and said in a deep voice, "But, what does this guy mean by a real Jinshin fight?" Su Chan said disapprovingly, "This guy must be deliberately mystifying. Don't worry about him." However, Li Yundong shook his head and said, "No, there must be something wrong. Maybe after a cultivator reaches the Jinshin phase, the routine and method of fighting will change, but I can't guess what changes will happen in a short time. It's best to figure it out in advance. Otherwise, when the time comes, we'll suffer a great loss." Su Chan thought for a moment and said, "Then go back and ask my master. She should know. Li Yundong nodded. That's the only way. After they left Mount Longhu, they flew all the way to Mount Tianlong. It only took them one afternoon to get there. When they arrived at the secret chamber of the Fox Zen School, the sky had just darkened. When Li Yunyang and Su Chan's yang spirit returned to the training room in the secret room, they found that Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin had already woken up from their meditation. She could vaguely sense that there was some Yuanyin qi in Li Yundong's pure Yuanyang qi. For a moment, she couldn't help but feel her heart skip a beat, as if she had thought of something inappropriate for children. She couldn't help but blush, and for a moment she forgot to ask where Li Yundong had gone. Zhou Qin had only been cultivating for a short time, so she couldn't detect his abnormality. She asked curiously, "Master, where did you and Su Chan go?" Li Yundong told her about his trip to Mount Longhu with a smile, but he hid his intention of going to Mount Longhu to argue for Zi Yuan. After that, Li Yundong asked Zi Yuan, "Zi Yuan, do you know what a real Jinshin fight is?" However, Zi Yuan didn't seem to hear his words. Her eyes were fixed, and for a moment she seemed to be in a daze. It wasn't until he called her name twice that her cheeks turned red and she said as if she had just woken up from a dream, "Ah? What did you just say?" Li Yundong looked at Zi Yuan with a strange expression and wondered in his heart, "What's wrong with this girl? Why does she look like she's lost her soul?" Li Yundong had no choice but to repeat what he had just said. Zi Yuan calmed down, shook her head and said, "A real Jinshin fight? I don't know. I've never seen two golden body masters fight. It's already amazing for cultivators to cultivate to the Yangshin phase. The Jinshin phase is really too rare. Cultivators who have reached this phase all cherish their feathers very much and don't easily fight with others. It was really too difficult to see two golden body experts fight. Not only have I never seen it, but my master has also never mentioned it to me. So." Zi Yuan looked at Li Yundong apologetically and said, "I'm really sorry. I don't know either." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "There's something you don't know? Ah, it's okay. When we go back, we'll ask Senior Ao Wushuang and see if she knows." Zi Yuan nodded and said with a smile, "Senior Ao Wushuang is experienced and knowledgeable. She should know." Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "Although it's not time to come out of seclusion yet, I still want to know what a real Jinshin fight is immediately. If I don't understand this question, I don't think I can calm down in meditation. Why don't I go back and ask first? You guys can continue to cultivate here in seclusion?" Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin nodded with a smile. Although Su Chan really wanted to go back with Li Yundong, seeing that Zi Yuan and Zhou Qin had stayed, she was too embarrassed to stay by Li Yundong's side. She grabbed Li Yundong's arm and said pitifully, "You have to come back as soon as possible." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "You make it sound like I won't come back, silly. If I'm fast, I'm afraid I'll be back in 2 or 3 hours." Only then did the little girl turn from worry to joy and giggle. Li Yundong said goodbye to Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and Zhou Qin and returned to Tianan City in his yang spirit body. He flew very fast all the way, and it didn't take long for him to return home in Tianan City. This time, Li Yundong didn't enter through the back door. Instead, he chose to go through the front door. When he walked to the door and wanted to find the key to open the door, he found that he had come out in his yang spirit body. Not only was he penniless, but he didn't even have the key to his house. Li Yundong couldn't help but smile bitterly and say, "It seems that I still have to go through the back door in the future." Li Yundong raised his hand and knocked on the door. After knocking twice, the door was suddenly pulled open. A girl scolded, "Hey, you little Japanese, are you done?" The girl was only halfway through her scolding when she immediately choked. She stared at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open and said in surprise, "Leader? Our leader is back." This girl was Ling Yu. As soon as she shouted, everyone in the Fox Zen school immediately rushed out. Chris also ran out of the room and looked at Li Yundong in surprise, as if she didn't understand why he had suddenly come back. Ao Wushuang also came out of her room and looked at Li Yundong strangely. She instinctively felt that something was wrong and asked, "Leader, what happened?" Li Yundong looked at everyone curiously, and his eyes fell on Ling Yu. He asked curiously, "I should be the one asking this question, shouldn't I? What happened to you? Ling Yu, who were you scolding just now?" Ling Yu smiled at Li Yundong and said, "Leader, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scold you. There were always 2 Japanese people blocking our door and saying that they wanted to see you. But weren't you in seclusion? It's impossible for you to see them, right? I told them the truth, but the 2 Japanese people didn't believe me. They kept blocking the door and clamoring to see you. I was annoyed by them, so As Ling Yu spoke, she curiously poked her head out of the door and murmured, "It's strange. Why haven't I seen the two Japanese people? Have they finally figured it out and left?" Li Yundong became more and more confused. "Two Japanese people looking for me? What's the matter?" At this time Ao Wushuang answered, "Didn't you receive a letter of challenge from Xinyan Tantrism before?" Li Yundong nodded. "I did. Does it have anything to do with this?" Ao Wushuang said, "Yes, one of the two Japanese people is a guy named Sayanjit Tsunekatsu. He has been insisting that you go with him to Mount Koya immediately." Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. "Isn't it my own business whether I go or not? Do you want to tie me up if I don't want to go?" Ling Yu quickly nodded and said, "Yes, yes, that's what they mean." Li Yundong's face darkened and he said unhappily, "Really?" At this time, the little foxes also said, "Yes, leader, the words of these two Japanese people are so unpleasant. We are so angry that our lungs are going to explode." Li Yundong frowned secretly and said lightly, "Humph, I hit the younger one and the older one is anxious. If she really wants revenge, let her come to me herself. I won't go." Ao Wushuang also smiled and said, "I think so too. However, leader, there is another very important thing. We have always wanted to tell you immediately, but we were afraid that it would affect your seclusion." Li Yundong asked curiously, "What is it?" Ao Wushuang said seriously, "The Medicine King tripod has been found, and it was found by a local villager in Mount Huangshan. Now he has sent it to an auction house to auction it." Li Yundong was shocked. "The Medicine King tripod? Auction? No way. What about the other sects? Do they know?" Ao Wushuang shook her head and smiled helplessly. "We saw the news on TV. Do you think they know?" Li Yundong suddenly stood where he was, his eyes staring blankly. He couldn't come to his senses for a while. After a long time, he sighed bitterly and said, "It's money again, isn't it?" At this time, everyone in the Fox Zen school nodded in unison. "Yes, yes." When Li Yundong thought of money, he felt a headache. He had thought that after opening the Desanxian shop, he could finally be self-sufficient, but he hadn't expected that there would be more and more places to use money, and it was getting more and more frightening. When he had gone down the Zhuji phase from the Himalayas, he had met Wu Hao and LV Fengping who wanted to snatch the Fan of Seven Treasures. At first, Wu Hao had even offered a high price of 20 million yuan to buy the Fan of Seven Treasures in Li Yundong's hands. It could be seen that the price of a powerful magical weapon was really terrifying. Although the Fan of Seven Treasures was also a powerful magical weapon, there were thousands of powerful magical weapons used for fighting in the cultivation world, and there were even hundreds of first-class high-level powerful magical weapons. The Medicine King tripod was the only top magical weapon that could be used for alchemy. Whoever had the Medicine King tripod would have the possibility of refining Rinyuan Jindan, Diuan Jindan, and even Tianyuan Fairy Pill. It could even be said that the Medicine King tripod was a powerful magical weapon that could change the power pattern of the cultivation world. Who wouldn't be jealous of such a powerful magical weapon? Who wouldn't want it? If all the sects and schools knew the news, they would definitely flock to it. On the day of the auction, there would definitely be a fierce capital fight and a battle of gold yuan. At that time, Li Yundong didn't even dare to think about what kind of sky-high price the Medicine King tripod would sell for. Dharma, wealth, companionship, and earthly treasures. Alas, wealth, wealth. Li Yundong couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Why am I so poor? Sure enough, if you haven't heard the Tao, the difficulty lies in the Dharma. If you have heard the Tao, the difficulty lies in wealth. Li Yundong was extremely depressed and thought, do I have to give up the Medicine King tripod? Retreat in the face of difficulties? But, to watch the Medicine King tripod be taken away by others, this is too uncomfortable, isn't it? Should I take the Medicine King tripod or not? This was a question worth considering. Chapter 601. Li Yundong was worried about the Medicine King tripod when Chris suddenly whispered to him, "Sure. Li Yundong, I still have some money. If you need it, I can give it to you first. Watch net." Li Yundong turned his head and looked at the blonde nominal disciple. He shook his head with a smile and said, "I appreciate your kindness, but I'm afraid you don't have enough money. You saw it that day on Heaven Capital Peak. So many cultivators fought for their magic treasures. That kind of tragedy is really shocking. You can also imagine how important a treasure the Medicine King tripod is. When the time comes, the price of the auction will definitely be bought by the big tycoons. People from small sects like us." At this point, Li Yundong smiled bitterly and shook his head. Forget it. The other people of the Fox Zen school shouted in surprise, "Leader, are we going to give up the Medicine King tripod just like that?" Li Yunyang smiled and said, "We have already got 3 Duen Jin Dan. There were 4 pills in 1 furnace and we got 3. This is already very profitable. As a man we should be content. If he got the Medicine King tripod, God would probably not be able to stand it anymore. Moreover, we have already used the Millennium Snow Lotus. How could it be so easy to find another Millennium Snow Lotus to use as a medicinal catalyst? Even if they get the Medicine King tripod, other cultivation sects can only refine Renyuan Jindan at most. They can never refine Duen Jindan." The little foxes of the Fox Zen school suddenly realized and said, "Leader is right. We don't want this Medicine King tripod so as not to provoke jealousy again." Ling Yu muttered softly, "No matter how I look at it, it looks like the sect leader is saying that the grapes are sour because he can't eat them." Li Yundong pretended to be angry and glared at Ling Yu. "Will you die if you don't expose me?" The whole Fox Zen school burst out laughing. Li Yundong smiled. He turned to Ao Wushuang and said, "Senior Ao Wushuang, I have something to ask you in private." Ao Wushuang smiled and said, "If you have something to say, just say it. You don't have to be so polite." Li Yundong pointed to his room and smiled. "Let's talk in my room." Ao Wushuang was a little confused. After following him into the room, she asked curiously, "What's so mysterious?" Li Yunyang told her about his fight with Zhang Kongyun in Mount Longhu and then asked, "Senior Ao Wushuang, is there anything different about Jinshin fighting methods? Why did Zhang Kongyun say that he would let me see the real golden body fight? Is he pretending to be mysterious or is it true?" At first Ao Wushuang listened to his words with a smile on her face, but when he mentioned Zhang Kongyun, the smile on her face suddenly sank. Her face seemed to be covered with a layer of frost and she said coldly, "Zhang Kongyun. Hey Zhang Kongyun." Seeing Ao Wushuang gnashing her teeth, Li Yunyang couldn't help but think of some of Zhang Kongyun's words before. He asked curiously, "Senior Ao Wushuang, do you know this Zhang Kongyun?" Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "Of course. Back then he and the leader of the Jingyi school had captured Wang Yuanshan together. Of course he knew him. Humph, even if he turned into ashes I would still know him." Li Yunyang saw that the grudge between the two of them was related to Wang Yuanshan, a cultivator of the previous generation. Ao Wushuang's eyes were full of fire, as if she wanted to tear Zhang Kongyun to pieces immediately. He didn't want to touch on Ao Wushuang's painful memories, so he changed the topic and said, "Senior Ao Wushuang, you must have seen the fight between Jinshin masters, right?" Ao Wushuang sneered again and again. "Of course. Wang Yuanshan, Zhang Kongyun, and Zhang Tianshi of the Jingyi school were all Jinshin masters at that time. Moreover, Wang Yuanshan was at the top level of the Jinshin, Zhang Tianshi was also at the top level, and even Zhang Kongyun was at the middle level of the Jinshin. That battle. Hey, how could I forget it?" As Ao Wushuang spoke, her eyes became very distant, as if she had gone back to 10 years ago. She murmured in a low voice as if she was talking in her sleep, "It was also because of this battle that I made up my mind to cultivate hard." Li Yunyang asked with concern, "Senior Ao Wushuang, can you tell me what's the difference between a Jinshin fight and a Yang spirit fight?" Ao Wushuang closed her eyes as if recalling the past. After a long time, she opened her eyes and said to Li Yunyang, "Do you want to know the difference? Yang spirit, come with me to the sky. I'll show you." Li Yunyang was originally a Yang spirit body. When he saw Ao Wushuang's figure disappear from the room in a flash, he immediately followed her and flew into the air. It was already late at night and there were many dense clouds in the sky. The two of them were flying in the air and it was impossible to see their figures at all. Ao Wushuang stopped in the air and said to Li Yunyang, "You have now cultivated to the Jinshin phase, but your level of fighting is still in the Yang spirit phase. Moreover, the most important thing is that you have never seen a real Jinshin fight, so you can't imagine what a Jinshin fight will be like. Therefore, you are very worried that you will lose in a fight with a Jinshin master in the future, right?" Li Yunyang nodded. "That's right." Ao Wushuang smiled faintly and said, "The fighting methods of Jinshin masters are different. Although I am not a Jinshin master, I have seen what a Jinshin master's fighting methods look like. I can simulate the scene for you to see and you can refer to it." Li Yunyang's face lit up with joy. "Thank you, Senior Ao Wushuang." Ao Wushuang smiled slightly and said, "You don't have to call me senior all the time. Don't you think I'm too old?" As she said this, she smiled. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning flew out from her side, and in the blink of an eye, she rushed to Li Yundong's face. Although this was similar to a sneak attack, Li Yundong was a Jinshin master after all, and his cultivation was higher than Ao Wushuang's. He subconsciously ran his Jinshi all over his body, and the protective Jinshin blocked the sneak attack. With a clang, a 3-feet-long Qingfeng sword suddenly appeared in front of Li Yundong. The sharp blade of the sword kept spinning and cutting at a high speed, like a saw chain, crazily cutting at Li Yundong's body. This sharp sword was the Bahuang sword. As soon as it was blocked, it instantly turned into a rolling iron lotus, crushing toward Li Yundong like an iron blood meat grinder. Li Yundong only felt that a terrifying force was constantly pressing down on his Jinshin, shaking his qi and blood all over his body. He faintly felt that his Jinshin was about to be shaken out of his body. Li Yundong's expression froze, and he immediately wanted to take out the fan of 7 treasures to resist the enemy. But as soon as he moved his mind, he saw that Ao Wushuang's 5-element magic had almost hit his face at the same time. At the same time, she appeared behind him in an instant. With a stern shout, her 5 fingers were like knives, stabbing toward the Lingtai acupoint on his back. This series of attacks was really like a storm, as fast as thunder and lightning. If Li Yundong hadn't been a Jinshin, he might have been defeated in an instant. However, Li Yundong relied on his Jinshin to withstand the most powerful attack of the Bahuang sword. He quickly recovered and slapped the Akalanatha fundamental seal in front of him. It immediately shook Ao Wushuang's magic into ashes, and even Ao Wushuang was sent flying more than 10 meters away by this powerful Buddhist power. Ao Wushuang flew a long way before she stopped. With a wave of her hand, the Bahuang sword instantly changed back to its original form and returned to her back. She flew back to Li Yundong and asked, "How is it? What do you feel?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "Senior Ao Wushuang, I just feel that your speed of making moves is much faster than that of ordinary young spirit masters." Several moves were made almost at the same time. "But other than that, I don't seem to feel anything special." Ao Wushuang smiled slightly and said, "Because I'm not a Jinshin master, I can only simulate the characteristics of a Jinshin master's fight. I can't be like them, who can attack you at the same time with several doppelgangers." As she said this, Ao Wushuang flew to Li Yundong, stretched out her hand, and slowly pointed 2 fingers at Li Yundong's chest like a sword. She said, "If this is my Bahuang sword, I will use my Jinshin doppelgangers and use the power of Jinshin to attack your chest. Although your indestructible Jinshin can block powerful magical weapons, it can't block the power of my Jinshin. What will you do?" Li Yundong didn't even think about it and immediately said, "Use the fan of 7 treasures, which also has the power of Jinshin, to resist it." Ao Wushuang smiled slightly and stretched out another finger non-committally. She pointed at Li Yundong's shoulder and said, "If I use the magic of Jinshin to attack your flank, what will you do?" Li Yundong said without hesitation, "Use the Mahamudra of Jinshin to block it." Ao Wushuang chuckled and her figure instantly split into 2 figures. The other one appeared behind Li Yunyang and pointed at his back. She said, "What if I use another powerful magical weapon to attack your back? What will you do?" Li Yundong frowned. He thought for a moment and said, "Use the Dharmakaya of wisdom with 3 heads and 6 arms to resist it." Ao Wushuang smiled and suddenly appeared above Li Yundong's head again. She pointed at the top of his head with her hand and said, "If I attack you with a powerful magical weapon at this time, what will you do?" Li Yundong was stunned. "Where did you get so many powerful magical weapons?" Ao Wushuang laughed and said, "How many powerful magical weapons do you have? If you have so many powerful magical weapons, why can't other people have them? Moreover, Jinshin masters are top cultivators. At such a realm, they would be ashamed to see others if they didn't have 4 or 5 powerful magical weapons with them." Li Yundong hesitated for a moment. He thought about the countermeasures and said, "Then I can only use my sword to deal with the enemy." Ao Wushuang snorted and said with a faint smile, "We've been talking on paper for a while. Why don't you try to do what I just said at the same time? Imagine if someone attacked you from all directions at the same time. Can you deal with so many attacks at the same time?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and tried to mobilize his Jinshi to control multiple powerful magical weapons at the same time. He also made a Mahamudra at the same time and divided the power of Jinshin into many parts. However, as soon as he tried, he felt that the Jinshi in his body was in a mess, and the powerful magical weapons seemed to be half a beat slower. It was completely different from what he had imagined. Li Yundong's face suddenly became very ugly. He said in surprise, "What's going on? I can understand why the Jinshi in my body is in chaos. After all, I have to divide the power of Jinshin into several unequal clones to defend myself, so it's inevitable that there will be problems. But why is the reaction of the powerful magical weapons also not sensitive? In the past, when Li Yundong controlled the powerful magical weapons, they would arrive in an instant as soon as he thought about it. He could defeat the enemy and retreat to ensure that he could retreat unscathed. But now there was a slow delay. Although it was less than a second for cultivators who were fighting, even 0.1 second was enough to determine the outcome in life and death. Ao Wushuang chuckled and said, "Do you know the power of Jinshin in a fight? Although your strength has reached the Jinshin phase, your fighting level has not kept up. You can't attack from all directions with several Jinshin clones at the same time, let alone control several powerful magical weapons to attack at the same time. Because your inner cultivation hasn't kept up, you can't multitask." Li Yundong couldn't help asking, "Then how can I improve my cultivation in this aspect?" Ao Wushuang shook her head and said, "I can't help you, but I remember that I also asked Wang Yuanshan a similar question. He told me something at that time." Li Yundong quickly asked, "What did he say?" Ao Wushuang's face was quite serious and she said very seriously, "This sentence is, this body can't be used outside. Thank you for your concern. Tang, I will take good care of my body, haha. In addition, thank you for the PK votes. Haha, this month I finally broke the 0 record with PK votes. Haha." Chapter 602. This body can't be outside the body? Li Yundong was stunned and asked curiously, "What does this mean?" Li Yundong knew that this body couldn't be outside the body. This sentence was a famous saying of Zhang Jixin, the 30th Taoist master of the Jingyi school. In short, this sentence could be changed to 4 words that the other 4 old, young, women and children were familiar with. All methods belong to the origin. The meaning of all methods belong to the origin meant that no matter who it was, what sect it was, or what Taoist magic they practiced, they must first cultivate their mind and body, accumulate Taoist skills and condense divine qi to integrate with the Tao, so as to achieve the goal of redeeming others and themselves. Go to the internet. But how can I condense divine qi to integrate with the Tao? This sentence was simple to say, but it was completely different to do it. Ao Wushuang laughed. She seemed to have expected that Li Yundong would ask such a question. She said, "I also asked Wang Yuanshan. Do you know what he answered me?" Li Yundong asked curiously, "What did he say?" Ao Wushuang smiled slightly and said, "He said, the Tao begets 1, 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, and 3 begets all things. Man follows the earth follows the heaven follows the Tao, and the Tao follows nature." Li Yundong was stunned. He had seen this sentence at the Taoist assembly and had also said to Zhou Qin, "This sentence explains all the meaning of cultivation." However, when this sentence was taken out alone, he understood what it meant, but what did it mean now? What did it mean for the cultivation of Jinshin fighting methods? Although Li Yundong had broken through to the Jinshin phase, possessing the power of Jinshin did not mean that he could perfectly exert this power. Ao Wushuang's words had made him fall into a chaotic mystery. Although Li Yundong had a profound knowledge of Taoist magic cultivation and a strong talent for fighting methods, he felt that there was always a thin layer of gauze in front of him. It seemed that as long as he gently poked it, he could come to a new world. But Li Yundong found that he was always blocked outside the door of this world. He wandered back and forth, but he could not enter. Ao Wushuang's words were like a bolt of lightning in his mind, instantly illuminating the chaotic darkness around him, allowing him to see this strange world clearly. But it was only for a moment. Soon, Li Yundong fell into endless sleepiness and darkness again. What he had just touched seemed to be out of reach again. He seemed to have understood something, but it also seemed like he didn't understand anything at all. Ao Wushuang looked at him in a daze. She smiled slightly and said, "Take your time to think about it. I'm a little tired. I'll go back to my room to rest first." At this time, Li Yunyang was thinking about Ao Wushuang's words. He answered Ao Wushuang blankly and fell into deep thought in the air alone. Ao Wushuang didn't disturb Li Yundong, so she flew home alone. But when Ao Wushuang was about to fly home, a white light suddenly flashed in front of her. Ao Wushuang quickly clamped her hands and immediately caught a paper crane that was flapping its wings. There were a few words written on the wings of the paper crane. Ao Wushuang frowned and glanced at the wings on the paper crane. She quickly looked around. After making sure that there was nothing unusual, she turned around and flew in another direction. Ao Wushuang flew all the way to the old house in Tianan City. She pushed the door open and entered. She saw Lu Yi sitting leisurely on the square table in the front yard, drinking tea by himself. Ao Wushuang frowned and stood at the door, but she refused to come in. She said coldly, "What's the matter?" Lu Yi didn't look at her. He just pointed to an empty teacup and a stool opposite him and said, "You're here? Sit down." Ao Wushuang hesitated for a moment and walked in, but she still didn't sit down. She said, "If you have something to say, just say it. I'm very busy and don't have much time." Lu Yi snorted and said, "You're busy watching TV and soap operas with the little guys at home every day? Hey Wushuang, you're really busy." Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "It's better than someone who is busy scheming all day long." Lu Yi smiled slightly and said, "Do you know why I asked you to come here today?" Ao Wushuang said impolitely, "Don't beat around the bush. Just say it." Lu Yi didn't care about Ao Wushuang's attitude. There was a flash of fanaticism in his eyes. He dipped his hand in the tea and wrote a few words on the table. Ao Wushuang took a look and saw that Lu Yi had written, February 2nd. Ao Wushuang was stunned. February 2nd? What do you mean? There seemed to be a blazing flame in Lu Ye's eyes, and his whole body was full of irrepressible excitement. February 2nd of the lunar calendar, this is the day when the mystical silver fox will be resurrected. What? So soon? Ao Wushuang was shocked. She immediately sat down and asked in surprise, "Why is it on this day?" Lu Yi couldn't help laughing. February 2nd, the dragon raises its head. Are you surprised? Yes, you can't think of it and neither can those bald donkeys. Hee, I have to thank that bunch of Japanese people for this. These days I've been thinking about how to release the sealed soul and spirit of the mystical silver fox. Now haha, I finally have a way. Ao Wushuang's eyes narrowed. Do you have a spy around Li Jiandong? Oh, Chowi? Li Yuehong? Or someone else? Lu Yi twirled his beard and said proudly, "You don't have to worry about that, but I need you to do something for me." Ao Wushuang's face was as dark as water. She said, "What is it?" "If it's against Li Jiandong, I won't do it." Lu Yi frowned and said unhappily, "Do you really think of him as the leader?" Ao Wushuang said angrily, "Nonsense. With Chan'er's character, if she knew that I had trapped Li Jiandong in an unjust situation, do you think she would still recognize me as her master? I can be alone for the rest of my life, but I can't watch Chan'er follow in my footsteps. Therefore, as long as anyone wants to do something against them, they have to go through me first." Ao Wushuang's words were sonorous and powerful, and her tone revealed a dignified aura that could not be offended. Lu Yi narrowed his eyes slightly. After a long time he slowly smiled and said, Good. You haven't changed at all. However, this matter is beneficial to Li Jiandong. Are you relieved to say so?" Ao Wushuang's face softened slightly. She said in a deep voice, "What is it?" Lu Yi twirled his beard and said with a smile, "It's very simple. No matter what method you use, you must ensure that Li Jiandong goes to Mount Koya and has a fight with Masako Tachibana, the goddess of Xinyan Tantrism." Ao Wushuang asked suspiciously, "Why? Why do you want me to go?" Li Yundong seemed to be an easygoing person, but he was a very opinionated person who could not be easily influenced by others. "And why did you ask him to go to Mount Koya?" "I've seen Masako Tachibana of Xinyan Tantrism. She's not a person to be trifled with. Her cultivation and kung fu are very strong and abnormal. You asked him to fight with Masako Tachibana, and you said that it was beneficial and harmless? Are you out of your mind? I think this is something that will only bring harm and no benefit." Lu Yi laughed and said, "If Li Jiandong wins against Masako Tachibana, he will become the first person in the Chinese cultivation world in the past 50 years. No one has ever been able to defeat the top cultivators in Japan. At that time he will gain both fame and fortune." Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "What's the use of this kind of reputation? The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. Even if you don't understand this, do you think he doesn't?" No matter how good Lu Ye's self-restraint was, he couldn't stand Ao Wushuang contradicting him again and again. He said angrily, "Enough. Li Jiandong must go to Mount Koya. As long as he goes, Masako Tachibana will definitely hold a grand cultivation party. At that time, almost all the cultivation sects in Japan will go there, and all the famous cultivators will participate. Even the members of the ape family will go there. At that time." Ao Wushuang frowned and said, "What? Do you want to catch all the Japanese cultivation world in one fell swoop?" Lu Yi sneered and said, "Do you think I'm crazy? Even the mystical silver fox can't do this kind of thing. Can I do it? I just need an opportunity to attract the attention of all the people in the Japanese cultivation world." As long as there is this opportunity, I can take advantage of the situation and release the sealed remnant soul of the mystical silver fox. Ao Wushuang's heart skipped a beat. She suddenly widened her eyes and said involuntarily, "You mean?" Lu Yi laughed and said, "Do you understand? Isn't it a great opportunity? Think about it. Even if it's for your disciple Su Chan, you have to do it. Otherwise." Ao Wushuang stared at Lu Yi, and her expression changed. After a long time, she was a little shaken and said unwillingly, "But how can you guarantee that Li Jiandong will win and get away?" Lu Yi said disapprovingly, "How could the reincarnation of Wisdom King lose? According to the relationship between God and Buddha, Li Jiandong can be regarded as the ancestor of the Japanese cultivators. These bastards should kowtow to him." Ao Wushuang was so angry that she laughed. "Do you really think that the excuse of the reincarnation of Wisdom King is a panacea that can cure all diseases? Do you know how many reincarnated living Buddhas have died in history since ancient times? You have to figure it out. Li Jiandong is just a reincarnation now, not the real body of Dharmaraja. Do you want to be invincible in the world? Let's talk about it when he transcends the thunder tribulation, becomes a golden immortal, and gets the divine power." Lu Yi also said angrily, "Then what do you want me to do? Do you know how long I've been planning for this day? I've even given him the Renyuan Jindan and the Diyuan Jindan. What else do you want me to do? Do you think I'm taking fewer risks than him? Do you know who I'm going to face? It's Abe, one of the most terrifying existences in the Japanese cultivation world, the Abe family." When Ao Wushuang heard the surname Abe, she was also shocked. She took a deep breath and said, "That's what you're planning. How dare you pull the tiger's teeth? Don't you know that the Abe family has been guarding the remnant soul of the mystical silver fox for 900 years? Lu Yi sneered and said, "Of course I know, but it's precisely because of this that I can succeed." Ao Wushuang's face darkened and she didn't speak for a long time. After a while she stood up and walked out without saying yes or no. When she reached the door, Lu Yi suddenly stopped her and said, "Wushuang, if you're worried about Li Jiandong, you might as well give him your Bahuang sword. Maybe the combination of the two swords will increase his chances of winning." Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "Do you also know that his chances of winning are low? The combination of the two swords. Do you think it's as simple as eating and cooking?" After that, Ao Wushuang went out without hesitation. At this time she was full of worries and didn't want to fly back immediately, so she walked slowly along Shantang alone. Although it was more than 9 o'clock in the evening, Shantang was still brightly lit. There were all kinds of colorful lights hanging high on the ancient and elegant cornices, decorating Shantang like a noble young woman, exuding a classical and dignified aura from head to toe. Ao Wushuang stopped at the place where the lights were waning. She suddenly looked back at the secular mortals playing on the street, and her eyes were full of confusion. She didn't know what kind of changes her decision would bring to Li Jiandong, Su Chan, the people around her, and even the cultivation world of China and Japan. Are these changes good or bad? On the second day of February, could the mystical silver fox really be resurrected? What would happen if she was resurrected? Ao Wushuang gradually hid her figure in the shadows. She casually took out the Bahuang sword behind her and pulled it out of its sheath. The Bahuang sword was carved with exquisite patterns. The long sword trembled slightly in her hand and buzzed, like a loyal servant who had seen his master and couldn't help making a sound of joy. Ao Wushuang looked at the Bahuang sword in her hand with a complicated look in her eyes and murmured in a low voice, "Shirbo is right. Only when the two swords are combined can you be a real powerful magical weapon. Only when you are together, are you the divine swords in the world. Even if something goes wrong in the future with the two swords in hand, even if Li Jiandong can't beat Masako Tachibana, he can still escape. Yuan Shan. It's probably time for the sword you left me to change its owner." Chapter 603. When Li Yundong returned to Mount Tianlong, it was already the morning of the next day. In the secret room of the Fox Zen school, Li Yundong repeatedly thought about what Ao Wushuang had said. Watch net. 7kom.com. This body cannot exist outside the body. Tao begets 1, 1 begets 2, 2 begets 3, 3 begets all things. Man follows the earth follows the heaven follows the Tao follows the nature. What is the meaning of these in the practice of Jinshin fighting methods? What was he referring to? Li Yundong almost broke his head thinking about it, but he still couldn't figure out the meaning of these words. When Ziyuan, Su Chan, and Zhou Qin woke up from their meditation, Li Yundong couldn't help but ask Ziyuan the questions in his heart. However, Ziyuan's face was also full of doubts, and she soon fell into deep thought. If Ziyuan was like this, Su Chan and Zhou Qin were staring at each other with their eyes wide open. One of them was a half-baked little fox, and the other was the daughter of a rich family who had only been cultivating for a few months. Asking them to answer these questions was even more difficult than asking Pushkin to write a 7-character quatrain in Chinese. Looking at Ziyuan, who was deep in thought, Zhou Qin, who was staring blankly, and the little girl who was scratching her ears and cheeks, Li Yundong knew that it seemed that only he could solve this problem. In the past, the days where he could always have someone to assist him in his cultivation were gone forever. Seeing his frown, Ziyuan couldn't help but comfort him. Don't always be entangled in this problem. There are some things that you can only obtain if you know how to let go. Cultivation is the same principle. If you keep on clinging to this problem and refuse to let it go, be careful that you will go berserk. Li Yundong thought for a moment and smiled with relief. What you said makes sense, but what I'm most troubled about now is not this matter, but the Medicine King tripod. Su Chan asked curiously, have you found the Medicine King tripod? Li Yundong shook his head and smiled, as if he was very emotional about the impermanence of the world. He smiled and said, yes, but it was found by a local villager in Mount Huangshan. Now this magic treasure has already been sent to the auction house, and it will be auctioned in 2 days. Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin all widened their eyes and exclaimed in unison, what? Is the Medicine King tripod going to be auctioned? Li Yundong saw that the three of them looked as if they had seen a ghost, as if aliens were going to attack the earth in the next second. He couldn't help laughing. It's strange, isn't it? When I first heard about it, I felt the same way as you did. But that was the truth. Moreover, this news was spread through the TV news. I reckon that the cultivation world is now boiling with excitement. Ziyuan said with a worried face, if such a powerful magical weapon falls into the hands of someone with evil intentions, the consequences are unimaginable. Compared with Ziyuan's benevolence and compassion, Zhou Qin was obviously more practical and utilitarian. She frowned and said, the most important thing is that we can't let this powerful magical weapon fall into the hands of our enemy, otherwise. Zhou Qin was not only the beneficiary of the Renyuan Jindan, but also the beneficiary of the Diyuan Jindan. She naturally knew the value of the Medicine King tripod. A Renyuan Jindan alone was enough for a cultivator like her, who had just entered the sect, to fight to the death with a young spirit master who had cultivated for many years. Once the enemy sect got the Medicine King tripod, even if it didn't produce a large number of Renyuan Jindan, even if it produced 3 or 4 more, it would still bring great threat to them. Su Chan was much simpler. For the little girl, whether the Medicine King tripod was important or not depended on Li Yundong's opinion. If he wanted the Medicine King tripod, then this powerful magical weapon must not fall into the hands of others. If he didn't want it, then it could go wherever he liked. Anyway, she didn't want to ask. As long as she could accompany her master, it was fine. The little girl blinked her eyes, turned her face to look at Li Yundong and said, Yundong, are we going to bid? Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, where do we get the money to bid? Zhou Qin opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but she quickly realized that her money was not enough at all. Zhou Qin thought for a moment and said tentatively, why don't we all pool our money together and see how much money we can get? She pondered for a moment, then suddenly asked, by the way, I found a lot of damaged antique calligraphy and paintings in a secret room. Li Yundong, do you know what's going on? If these antique calligraphy and paintings were all in good condition, you wouldn't have to worry about money now. When Li Yundong heard this, he immediately complained in his heart, well, Ziyuan, you're usually such a smart person. Why did you mention it now? Before Li Yundong could speak, he felt Su Chan gently tugging at his sleeve. Li Yundong didn't even need to look back to know that the little girl was hiding behind him and making a face. He pretended to look regretful and said, alas, I don't know which damned person burned all these antique cultural relics. I'm so angry. Su Chan stuck out her tongue behind Li Yundong and pretended to be distressed. She shook her head and sighed, yes, I don't know which damned person broke all these antique cultural relics. I'm so angry. Ziyuan asked with a puzzled face, strange. You. How do you know that these cultural relics were burned? How do you know that these cultural relics were broken? Li Yundong and Su Chan suddenly froze. They couldn't help but look at each other, feeling very embarrassed. Li Yundong reacted very quickly. He quickly laughed and said with a dry smile, "What's so strange about that? It's not like I haven't entered that stone room before." Ziyuan still asked curiously, "But how do you know that it was broken?" Li Yundong's smile suddenly froze, and his laughter stopped abruptly. He was like a duck that had been strangled. His expression was stiff for a while, and then he suddenly turned his face, stared at Su Chan and said, "Yes, how do you know that it was broken?" Su Chan saw that Li Yundong was trying to make trouble for her, so she made a face at him. Her playful and cunning eyes seemed to say, "You can't scare me." The little girl said with a smile, "Of course I know. I saw it with my own eyes. Sister Ziyuan, let me tell you." Seeing that the situation was not good, Li Yundong quickly said with a righteous expression, "Let's not talk about this useless thing now. Let's hurry up and continue cultivating. What's the use of saying this? Can these antique calligraphy and paintings be restored?" Li Yundong had the expression of a master, and his serious face seemed to be about to shine with the light of a great cultivator at any time. He waved his hand and said unquestionably, "Fellow Taoists, cultivation is difficult. It's as difficult as going to heaven. Don't worry about these trivial things. Let's all continue cultivating. I'm going to meditate." After that, Li Yundong didn't wait for Ziyuan to ask anything else. He sat cross-legged and closed his eyes. Ziyuan felt more and more strange, but she was also keenly aware of Li Yundong's strangeness, especially when she saw that Su Chan wanted to laugh but didn't dare to. She couldn't help laughing, which made her even more puzzled. Ziyuan winked at Su Chan and Zhou Qin. The three women quietly stood up and walked to another stone room. Li Yundong saw that the three of them had left and Ziyuan had finally stopped asking. He immediately breathed a sigh of relief and thought to himself, "It was so close. I almost became the biggest sinner in the antique world of China. If Ziyuan knew, wouldn't my reputation be ruined?" After Ziyuan entered the stone room, she said to Su Chan in a very low voice, "Su Chan, is Li Yundong hiding something from us? Was he the one who destroyed the things in that stone room?" Su Chan chuckled, shook her head and said with a mysterious face, "Sister Ziyuan, I won't tell you." But Ziyuan and Zhou Qin were not fools. They looked at each other and guessed what was going on. Seeing that neither of them was willing to mention it, Ziyuan changed the topic and said, "I think Li Yundong still wants this Medicine King tripod very much, but he doesn't have the money." Zhou Qin hesitated for a moment and said softly, "I do have some money." Ziyuan thought for a moment and asked, "How much?" Zhou Qin thought for a moment and said, 500,000 yuan in cash that can be used at any time, and 2 million yuan in liquid funds that can be transferred within 2 days. Su Chan couldn't help but open her mouth wide and look at Zhou Qin in amazement. "Sister Zhou Qin, you are so rich." The little girl turned her face and looked at Ziyuan. She asked curiously, "Sister Ziyuan, how much money do you have?" Ziyuan thought for a moment and said, "Jingyi school froze the assets of our Linggong sect before. I don't know if they have been unfrozen now. If they are, there should be about 6 million yuan." Only then did Su Chan let out a cry and said, "Yes, I've forgotten what you said last time." Su Chan looked at Zhou Qin and then at Ziyuan. Her face was full of envy and admiration, but she was very sad in her heart. Sister Zhou Qin and Sister Ziyuan are so rich. They can help Yundong, but I'm a poor girl. I have nothing and can't help Yundong with anything. At this time, Zhou Qin was all focused on raising money. She didn't notice Su Chan's little girl thoughts at this time. She said, "Although I can only transfer more than 2 million yuan, I know a few reliable businessmen. If I ask them to help me, I should be able to get 10 million yuan. 10 million yuan. Ziyuan thought for a moment and asked, "Can we get 10 million yuan together, or can you get 10 million yuan?" Zhou Qin smiled and said, "It's 10 million yuan that I can gather. In fact, I can get more. With the power of my father's background, it would be a joke to say that I can only get 10 million yuan. But, raising money in such a short period of time will cause a lot of trouble, and it will also bring a lot of inconvenience to my father. Besides, the other people who can lend me money are all meant." As she said this, Zhou Qin looked in the direction of Li Yundong next door and whispered with a smile, "I'm afraid that he will be unhappy if he knows, so I didn't want to go to them." Ziyuan also smiled slightly. She said, 10 million yuan is not a small amount. In this way we can get 16 million yuan. It may not be enough, but we can find 1 or 2 sects to bid together and form the proportion of the funds into the proportion of shares. When the elixir of life is refined, we can distribute it according to the proportion. Zhou Qin frowned and hesitated for a moment, then said, Then do we have to share the elixirs we have worked so hard to refine with others? Ziyuan laughed and said, it's inevitable that the Medicine King tripod will be sold at an amazing price. The best outcome we can be sure of is to ensure that it doesn't fall into the hands of the bad guys. Zhou Qin nodded and echoed, you're right. Let's make sure of this first before we talk about anything else. Ziyuan thought for a moment and said, why don't we go back now and get things ready first? At this time, Zhou Qin was no longer in the mood to cultivate. She nodded and said, okay, I'll go back with you. Seeing that both of them were about to leave, Su-chan also shouted, I'll go back too. I also have money. Zhou Qin and Ziyuan turned their heads curiously and said in unison, you? Su-chan saw that both of them were looking at her at the same time, so she immediately shrank her head and said in a low voice, of course I also have a little money. Don't look down on me. Zhou Qin and Ziyuan had been with Su-chan for a long time. They knew that this girl was an out-and-out pauper. If she suddenly knew some powerful magic at this time they would believe it, but if this little girl suddenly became rich, they would never believe it. Both Zhou Qin and Ziyuan couldn't help laughing. Zhou Qin smiled and said, Su-chan, you'd better keep that money for your own pocket money. It's not enough. Ziyuan also smiled and said, Su-chan, Li Jiandong will know your kindness, but this money is really not enough. Su-chan was provoked by their words, and her heart suddenly moved. She was not convinced and said, you don't believe me? I'll go back and show it to you. I'm sure it's a lot. At that time, Master Ch. No, I saved it all at that time. Ziyuan saw that Su-chan seemed to have spilled the beans just now, but she didn't expose her. She just smiled and said, well, let's go back first. Su-chan blurted out, but when she flew back, she couldn't help but regret it in her heart. I really don't have money, but Master does. When Master wanted to get married to Wang Yuanshan, she had prepared a generous dowry for him. I've seen this kind of money before. When I go back I can just ask Master for it. But, will Master spend all his dowry money? Su-chan was uneasy, but she had already said it. She couldn't swallow it in front of Ziyuan and Zhou Qin, could she? Seeing that she was about to return to her home in Tianan City, the girl suddenly remembered what Ao Wushuang had said to her. No? Then can't we get it ourselves? This is the tradition of our Fox Zen school. The girl's eyes lit up, and her mind suddenly became active. Her pair of beautiful foxy eyes smiled like crescent moons. Yes, I can steal it. Take it. Master, this time Chaner is sorry to you again. Chapter 604. When Su-chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin returned home, they immediately aroused the curiosity of everyone in the Fox Zen school. After understanding the reason for their return, the little foxes stared at Ziyuan and Zhou Qin with their eyes wide open and a look of awe on their faces. Watch net. It turned out that Zhou Qin and Ziyuan, who lived with them all day long, were two rich women. Chris tentatively said to Ziyuan, I also have some money, but I'm afraid that shirt. Li Yundong doesn't want my money. Do you need it? Zhou Qin had always sympathized with Chris and had a good impression of her. She wanted to help her and asked, how many do you have? Chris thought for a moment and said, about 3 or 4 million. Although Zhou Qin vaguely knew a little about Chris' family background and knew that she had an excellent background, she didn't know that Chris was so rich. She said in surprise, Chris, you are very rich. How could he casually take out 3 or 4 million? Chris waved her hand worriedly and said, it's US dollars, not pounds. Don't expect too much. Well, it turned out that the other party felt that this little bit of money was too little to take out. Zhou Qin suddenly smiled bitterly. She turned to Ziyuan and said, well, compared with her, we are poor people. She alone can take out more than 20 million. Ziyuan smiled faintly and said, there is always a higher mountain in the world. But Chris is right. I believe it's not difficult for her to take out this sum of money. But it's a little difficult for Li Yundong to accept it and not think that Chris is using this money to buy people's hearts. Chris smiled awkwardly and said, I was afraid that he would misunderstand, so I didn't dare to tell him before. But I really want to help. Ziyuan thought for a moment and said, let's count your money in for the time being. We don't have to worry about trifles in the face of important matters. If we include Crazy's money, we'll probably be able to raise about 40 million. That's not a small amount. Even if we partner with other sects, we'll still be able to get a relatively large proportion of the shares. We won't be at a disadvantage. At this time, Chao Yi and Lu Yuehong of the Fox Zen School were listening attentively. Lu Yuehong quietly pulled Chow Yi aside and said in a low voice, "Hey, should we also contribute?" Chow Yi suddenly smiled bitterly and said, "Us? Who doesn't know that everyone in the Fox Zen school, from the leader to the younger generation, is a poor man? Where do we get the money?" Lu Yuehong said anxiously, "Didn't the leader give us money from the operating profits of the Desanxian in the past?" Chow Yi smiled bitterly and said, "How much?" Lu Yuehong said seriously, "It's not about money, it's about attitude." Chow Yi thought about it seriously and nodded. "You're right. The little foxes were all clever." When they heard this, they all knew that they were Chow Sherbua, Chow Yi and Chow Yi were Chow and Yi were Zhou Yi Zhen were and Chow Yi and said all and said they and all Yi and said the little foxes were all clever. When they heard this, they immediately reacted. They subconsciously covered their pockets and said in horror, "Chow Yi Sherbua? Are you serious? You even want to take our pocket money? How much does it cost?" Chow Yi said angrily, "It's not about money, it's about attitude." The little foxes cried and cried, "Sherbua Chow Yi, please be merciful. I've already spent all my pocket money." "That's right. I only have a few coins in my pocket. Do you want them? My money is all in savings. Sherbua Chow Yi, I can't take it out." Chow Yi was so angry that she laughed. "You've spent it all? Your food and accommodation are all provided by the sect leader. Why would you need to spend money? How did he spend it? Coins? I want coins too. Hand them over. Time of life and death? Bastard, you're basically an unregistered resident. You don't even have an ID card. What kind of date of death do you have? Where is your passbook? Show it to me." In the face of Chow Yi's incorruptibility, the little foxes all handed over their private money with bitter faces. When the last little fox handed over the last coin in her pocket with tears in her eyes, they suddenly realized a problem. Why didn't Su Chan pay? In an instant, almost all the little foxes looked at Su Chan in unison. Seeing that everyone was looking at her, the little girl rolled her eyes and said quickly, "I'll go get the money now." After Su Chan rushed out of Chow Yi's room, she quickly went into Ao Wushuang's room and began to rummage through it. But the little girl rummaged through it, but she couldn't find Ao Wushuang's private money. Su Chan immediately squatted by the bed in frustration, holding her cheeks in her hands and said with a frown, "Strange. Where could it be?" Just as Su Chan was frowning, she suddenly heard a voice coming from outside. It was Ling Yu's voice. "Strange, where did Su Chan go?" The other little foxes also chattered. "Could it have slipped away?" "No way. We've all handed it over. Why didn't she hand it over? Alas, she's the one the leader dotes on the most." Su Chan was so angry that her mouth pouted and her face was full of displeasure. Just as she was about to go out and argue with them, she heard Ling Yu say in surprise, "Shu, you're back?" Su Chan was shocked. "Master is back?" Although she hadn't stolen anything, Su Chan still had a guilty conscience. She immediately used the goddess Nyan Madra to hide herself. At this time, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and Chris had all returned to their respective rooms to work on the fundraising, so Ao Wushuang didn't meet them. She just nodded lightly to the little foxes outside the door and returned to her room. Su Chan saw that after Ao Wushuang entered the door, she looked confused and sleepy. She sat alone on the edge of the bed and was lost in thought. Just as Su Chan was about to slip away quietly, she suddenly found a brocade bag of 7 treasures hanging beside Ao Wushuang. The little girl's eyes suddenly lit up and she thought to herself, "Yes, almost all of Master's treasures are hidden in this bag. Her secret money must be hidden here too. But, this 7-treasure brocade bag is right beside Master. No matter how capable I am, I can't steal anything from Master." The little girl's expression immediately collapsed. She frowned and bit her red lips tightly. Her eyes kept darting around as she quickly tried to think of a solution. After a long time, when the little girl had thought of the nth way, Ao Wushuang sighed softly. She stood up gracefully, walked to the bathroom in the bedroom, turned on the showerhead and began to fill it with hot water. Su Chan's eyes suddenly lit up. She was overjoyed and said, "Ah, Master is going to take a bath. This is a good opportunity." Su Chan watched eagerly as Ao Wushuang took off her clothes one by one and walked into the bathroom naked. After a while, the bathroom was steaming, and on the frosted glass, a curvaceous and flawless figure with a perfect body proportion could be seen. Su Chan quietly walked to the door and listened carefully. After confirming that Ao Wushuang was taking a bath, she quickly jumped onto the bed and rummaged through the 7-treasure brocade bag that Ao Wushuang carried with her. But as soon as the little girl found the 7-treasure brocade bag, she was overjoyed and was about to turn around and leave when she suddenly saw Ao Wushuang standing in front of her with a frosty face. She sneered and said, "I've caught you this time, haven't I? Humph, you want to fight with me? I found you as soon as I came in. Tell me, what do you want to do with my 7-treasure brocade bag?" Su Chan's eyes widened and she turned to look at the bathroom, only to see that the door was still closed, but there was no one inside. She immediately complained in her heart, "I was careless." Su Chan smiled dryly. Her eyes darted around as she tried to come up with an excuse and reason in her mind. Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "Make it up, hurry up. You've been like this since you were a child. When you want to lie, you roll your eyes. Let's see what reason you can come up with this time." Seeing that she couldn't hide it, Su Chan had no choice but to lower her head helplessly and tell her everything. After that, she took Ao Wushuang's hand in a sad voice and begged, "Master, please help Yundong. Sister Ziyuan, Sister Zhou Qin, and even Chris can help Yundong, but I can't do anything. I'm so sad." Su Chan's words were delicate and pitiful, but Ao Wushuang was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She pointed at Su Chan and said in a trembling voice, "You evil disciple, do you still care about me? If you had come to me openly, would I not have helped you? I had planned to give this money to him a long time ago. Even if you wanted to marry him, I would have given it to you sooner or later. Wang Yuanshan and I have been separated for a long time. What's the use of keeping this money? To buy a coffin for myself?" Ao Wushuang was so angry that she trembled. She said, "But you, without telling me, dared to make decisions without authorization and steal my things. Is that what I taught you before? Even if I don't give it to you, can you steal my things? I worked hard to bring you up, teach you cultivation, teach you magic, and teach you how to deal with people. Is this how you repay me?" Su Chan was scolded by Ao Wushuang, and she was so ashamed that she couldn't show her face. She burst into tears and knelt down in front of Ao Wushuang. She hugged her knees with both hands and cried, "Master, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Don't be angry. Please forgive me." Ao Wushuang's face softened a little. She said with heartache and sadness, "Chaner, I know you're sad. Li Yundong has Ziyuan, an almost perfect partner, and Zhou Qin, an intelligent and brave girl from a rich family with a strong background. Your pressure must be unimaginable. But have you ever thought about what you value when you love someone? What does he value about you? If Li Yundong dislikes you because you're not as rich as them, then why do you still love him? What's there to love about such a man?" Ao Wushuang's words were like the evening drum and the morning bell, knocking heavily on Su Chan's heart and shocking her. The little girl wiped her tears, stood up, and said with a serious face, "Master, I know what to do." Just as Su Chan was saying this, Ling Yu outside the door cheered in surprise. "Leader, you're back too?" When Su Chan heard the voice, she immediately wiped away the tears on her face with both hands. Without saying a word, she rushed out of Ao Wushuang's room and rushed to her own room. Li Yundong saw that Su Chan had rushed out of Ao Wushuang's room without even saying goodbye to him and had gone back to her own room. He was curious, but he didn't think too much about it. He smiled at Ling Yu and said, "Yes, I'm always thinking about the Medicine King tripod. I have too many distracting thoughts, so I can't meditate in seclusion." Later, I found that Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Zhou Qin had all disappeared. I guess they were in the same situation as me. They must have come back to work on the money. Alas, as the leader, how can I be free and unfettered? Anyway, I'm not in the mood to cultivate, so I might as well come back. At this time, the little foxes also rushed over and complained, "Leader, yes, we have all taken out our money to raise the money." "That's right, leader, I don't have a penny now." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly saw Su Chan rush out with a pink Hello Kitty piggy bank in her arms. Without saying a word, she smashed it on the ground. Li Yundong was shocked and cried out involuntarily, "Chaner, what are you doing?" Su Chan didn't answer. She stared blankly at the broken piggy bank on the ground and the money falling out of it. She squatted down, picked up the money one by one and carefully counted it. Then she looked up at Li Yundong and said, "Yundong, this is all the money I have. I hope you don't think it's too little." Li Yundong was stunned. He stared blankly at Su Chan, only to see the girl in front of him looking at him eagerly. Tears were already rolling in her eyes, as if they were going to burst out in the next second. Li Yundong couldn't help but look at the piggy bank that had been smashed to pieces on the ground. There were 2 pieces of silver keys on the ground. He suddenly remembered the time when he had first met Su Chan. Li Yundong clearly remembered that he had bought her a piggy bank. The little girl had been holding the piggy bank and smiling heartlessly. She said with a smile, "But I can't open the piggy bank. What if you secretly take the money while I'm not here?" This silly girl, she stuffed the key into the piggy bank. She can't even get the money, yet she's afraid of me taking it. But is she really afraid of me taking her money? Li Yundong suddenly remembered that when Su Chan had been injured by Lin Youfa, he had held her in his arms and taken a taxi. The little girl hadn't forgotten to hold the piggy bank even when she was running away. What had she said at that time? Ah yes, she had said at that time, "Money, you will have no money to spend." Just when he was about to smash the piggy bank to pay the taxi fare, the little girl had taken out a 50 from her side. That was all the money she had. What had he said at that time? Ah, at that time he had said, "Didn't you put all of it in?" But the little girl had said, "I was afraid that one day you would take the piggy bank away and leave me. I can still use the money to find Yuk." These bits and pieces of memories flooded into Li Yundong's mind like a tide, filling his heart with bitterness. In an instant, his eyes were blurred and moist. Li Yundong forced a smile and held back his tears. He pretended to be relaxed and joked, "Silly girl, you even smashed the piggy bank. Aren't you afraid that I will despise you in the future and you will have no money to find me?" The grievances and discomfort that had accumulated in Su Chan's heart for a long time suddenly burst out. She burst into tears and threw herself into Li Yundong's arms, wailing, "Yundong, I am very poor, have no money, and I am naughty. I always cause trouble for you and I can't help you, but please don't despise me." Li Yundong's eyes were filled with tears. Chapter 605. It was another sunny day. Go to the internet. $. Calm $. Because it was a southern city, although spring had not officially begun, the temperature in Tianan City had begun to rise significantly. Especially when the sun came out, the sky was clear and the sun was shining brightly. There were girls in short skirts and stockings everywhere on the street, making people feel as if the warm spring and midsummer had arrived early. It was even more so on the pedestrian street of Tianan City. The street was full of tourists rubbing shoulders. Led by Su Chan, Ling Yu and the little foxes arrived early at the Desangxian store. Because of the many trivial matters before, Li Yundong hadn't paid attention to the store for many days. Especially in the past 2 days, Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others had been busy raising money, so they couldn't spare any attention. But after all, the Desangxian store was rented in a prime location. If it was open one day less, it would make less money. At Li Yundong's request, Su Chan took the little foxes to the store and prepared to take over the tea shop business again. Before coming here, Su Chan didn't want to care about these things anymore, especially because she was really scared by what had happened last time. She was afraid that she would cause another black shop incident and cause great trouble for Li Yundong. However, Li Yundong smiled mysteriously and told the little girl that he had found a perfect partner for Su Chan, who could help her manage the Desangxian. The tea shop was not as good as restaurants, hotels, or even coffee shops and other leisure places. In addition, the Desangxian was open for a few days, so the customer flow had been very unstable. Some high-ranking officials and nobles who wanted to come to support them had lost their temper. 2 out of 3 times they came, they were rejected. What could they do? They also wanted to save face. Especially some guests who wanted to drink some high-end tea saw that the Desangxian was closed every now and then, so they had to go to Zhao's tea house next door to drink tea. As a result, the business of Desangxian became colder and colder. The little girl and the little foxes were like a group of idle girls. They sat in a semicircle at the tea tables around the hall, doing their own things in boredom. Who could it be? Su Chan rested her chin on her hand and sat at the tea table in the hall in boredom, looking at the flow of people outside. What do you mean? Who is it? Ling Yu curiously came over and asked. Su Chan played with her braid with one hand and sighed. Yundong found me a helper. Ling Yu became more and more curious. She said, Su Chan, isn't your relationship with the leader very good? Why is he still stuffing people around you? What the 2 of you said yesterday moved me to tears. Su Chan rolled her eyes at Ling Yu and snorted, What do you know? It's precisely because we have a good relationship that I want to find helpers for me. Am I supposed to rely on you guys? You guys are more troublemakers than me. If we rely on you, the Desangxian will probably close down. The little foxes also came over and said, Shiji Su Chan, what you said is wrong. How did we cause trouble? That's right, that's right. You were the one who took the lead every time. Su-chan pounded the table and stood up. She glared at him and said angrily, Look, what are you talking about? If the guests see us making such a ruckus, will they still come? Just as she finished speaking, she saw two tall and slender girls, dressed fashionably and youthful-looking, walk in. Ling Yu immediately clapped her hands and laughed. Guests are coming. Before Su-chan could turn her head, she urged the little foxes, Hurry up and greet the guests. Don't just sit there like a fool. But as soon as she finished speaking, one of the little foxes suddenly pointed at one of the girls and said strangely, Hey, you look so familiar. Su-chan turned her head and saw two girls standing in front of her. Even though they were wearing cartoon t-shirts, they couldn't hide their magnificent breasts. The other girl had a slim figure and a round face. She looked quite sweet. Who else could it be but Ching Ching and Feng Na? Su-chan thought. Su-chan was pleasantly surprised. It's you guys? Why are you here? Come in and have a seat. Please. Are you here to drink tea? Feng Na laughed and said, Didn't Li Yundong tell you? He called me this morning and asked me to come to the shop. Su-chan exclaimed in realization. So it's you? The little girl giggled and said, I was wondering why he was so secretive. It turns out that he asked an acquaintance to help. Ching Ching, who was standing to one side, waved at Su-chan as if she had been left out. She said angrily, I'm here too. Su-chan walked over with a smile, took their hands and said, I'm relieved that you're here. Ching Ching asked curiously, Su-chan, aren't you afraid that the two of us will make trouble for you? Su-chan looked at Ling Yu and the little foxes and giggled. Anyway, they can't be more troublesome than us, hee. The little girl turned around and smiled at Feng Na. Big sister Feng Na, now that you're here, I can leave everything in the store to you. Anyway, I don't know anything, so you can just go ahead and do it yourself. Feng Na smiled and said politely, Su-chan, you're too polite. I'm just a small worker and you're the boss. You can tell me what to do. Su-chan shook her head and said, No, there are many things I don't understand. In the past, I pretended to understand. As a result, I caused a lot of trouble and caused a lot of trouble for Yundong. I don't want to cause any more trouble, so Sister Feng Na, please help me. As she said this, she took Feng Na's hand and shook it gently. Seeing that she was unwilling to speak frankly, Shen Wankai replied with an "oh" and didn't ask any more questions. For Shen Wankai, he had always wanted to be apprenticed to Li Yundong and learn the art of health cultivation. Even if he couldn't live forever, it would still be good to live for 100 years. Especially after seeing Li Yundong's divine skill last time, he regarded Li Yundong as an omnipotent celestial being in his heart. However, Li Yundong refused to accept his apprenticeship. He kept hinting that he had to spend all of his family's wealth and wife before he could be apprenticed to cultivate. However, he had such a large family and such a huge foundation. How could he just let it go? Shen Wankai had been working hard in the business world for many years, and his character had been honed to be indomitable. Naturally, he was not a person who would give up easily. Seeing that Li Yundong did not seem to be a greedy person, he began to think about a way to save the country in a roundabout way. At first, he aimed at Desanxian. He thought that since Li Yundong had opened Desanxian with great fanfare, he must have wanted to make money. Even if he didn't want to make money, he also hoped that his business could be prosperous, right? After all, no one wanted to open a tea shop in this golden area where every inch of land was worth an inch of gold and lose money every day, right? No matter how rich he was, he couldn't do this. As long as he hoped that the business of this shop would be good, he would be able to support this shop. At that time, Li Yundong would have to accept this favor even if he didn't want to. But Shen Wankai had been here for several days before, and he had been rejected. They didn't open the door at all. This made Shen Wankai's judgment seriously shaken. He thought to himself, could it be that he opened this tea shop just for fun? Does he care about business at all? But today Shen Wankai immediately knew that his speculation was right. Li Yundong must care a lot about the business of this Desanxian. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent his favorite girlfriend to the shop. Although Shen Wankai didn't see Li Yundong and Zi Yuan, who he wanted to see the most, he sat down calmly. After ordering a cup of tea at random, he leisurely drank the Longjing tea that Su-chan had made for him. At first, the little foxes could still take care of him carefully, but gradually they became a little bored and began to whisper to each other. Shen Wankai was also very determined. He sat there for a full 2 hours. This kind of thing was simply inexplicable in the eyes of others, but in Shen Wankai's eyes, it was a matter of course. When he was doing business in the past, he had relied on this unswerving and persevering spirit to create many opportunities. The reason why Shin Wankai didn't leave was that he wanted to have more contact with them, talk more and hear more from them. Moreover, based on his understanding of women, especially young girls, when they gathered together in groups of 3 or 5, it would be a waste of their talent if they didn't gossip about their daily lives. As long as they talked, Shin Wankai would never believe that he wouldn't benefit from the topics they talked about. Sure enough, the little foxes couldn't help but start talking about all kinds of gossip. At first, the little foxes were still talking about entertainment news and soap operas on TV, and Shin Wankai was drowsy. But when he suddenly heard a sentence, he suddenly shivered and listened carefully without any drowsiness. Chapter 606. Shin Wankai pricked up his ears and heard Ling Yu and the little foxes whispering about how Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and the others were raising money. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. Hey, do you think Leader will be able to bid for the Medicine King tripod? I don't know. I'm very curious about which sect will cooperate with Leader. Yes, the cultivation world seems to be full of hostile sections. Which sect is willing to cooperate with us? Isn't the Chuanjin Dragon sect on good terms with us? Bah, that's because they are good at pretending. Look at what happened at the last Taoist assembly. Didn't that Du Fei also hide far away? That's not true. They are big sects, so they naturally have more concerns. Do you think it's a child's play? TSK, even if they can cooperate, they may not be able to bid for it. How many sects are coveting the Medicine King tripod? Even I want a Renyuan Jin Dan. Yes, it would be great if Leader could get the Medicine King tripod. I don't dare to hope for the Diyuan Jin Dan. When the time comes, everyone will get one Renyuan Jin Dan, hee hee. The little fox who spoke last made everyone laugh, but they soon found that Shin Wankai was looking at them with twinkling eyes. Ling Yu's expression suddenly became serious, and she lowered her voice and said, "Stop talking. Don't let outsiders hear these things. Be careful of causing trouble again." The little foxes stuck out their tongues one after another and dispersed. Shin Wankai was eavesdropping. Although he didn't hear all of the conversation, he heard a lot of it intermittently. Shin Wankai thought to himself, strange, who is the leader they are talking about? Judging from the situation last time, it seems to be young Master Li? Hey, what era is this? You still call him leader? Shin Wankai was subconsciously laughing in his heart, but soon he saw that when Feng Na was busy wiping the table, she accidentally knocked over a plate, and the teacup and teapot on the plate suddenly fell to the ground. Su Chan, who was standing to the side, only glanced at them from the corner of her eye. She immediately bent down and bent her body into a graceful arch. Her slender hands gently grabbed the teacup and teapot in her hands. Su Chan's move was beautiful and elegant, inadvertently showing her amazing reflexes and skills that were different from ordinary people. Shin Wansai's heart suddenly trembled. He suddenly remembered that when he had participated in the opening of the Desangxian tea shop, these little foxes had all shown amazing skills. Moreover, Li Yundong's divine skills were amazing. He really couldn't be judged by secular standards. Shin Wankai thought to himself, could it be that this young Master Li is not only an immortal, but also the leader of a sect like Wudong and Shaolin? Shin Wankai was puzzled and wanted to find out what was going on. However, he was an experienced and knowledgeable veteran, so he didn't dare to take the initiative to ask Su Chan and the others. He was afraid that he would offend them and make them unhappy, thus cutting off his path to immortality. It seems that there won't be any results if I stay here any longer. I heard from them that young Master Li is going to participate in an auction to bid for a Medicine King tripod or something. I don't know what it is, but if I can bid for it, I'll give it to young Master Li. I think he will be grateful to me, right? Shin Wankai thought for a moment and came up with an idea. He stood up, said hello to Su Chan, Feng Na, and the others with a smile and then went on his own. After returning to his home, Shin Wankai pressed a button in front of his desk and called his personal secretary. Shin Wansai's personal secretary was an ordinary-looking man named Su Weikong. He wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses on his face and looked very gentle. After Su Weikong walked to Shin Wansai's room, he bowed respectfully and said, "Mr. Shin, what can I do for you?" Shin Wankai crossed his arms over his chest. After pondering for a while, he said, "Go and check if any auction houses have sent me a letter recently. Before every large-scale auction, The major auction houses would try their best to hype up and attract more attention to each auction, so that the auction items could be sold at a higher price and earn more benefits. However, for a business giant like Chen Wankai, who was interested in antiques, calligraphy and paintings and was also a rich businessman, there was no need to pay attention to these news at all. People like him were the top VIPs of the major auction houses. As long as there was an important auction, they would be invited to participate in a VIP letter in advance. After hearing Chen Wansai's words, Su Weikong immediately laughed and said, "There's no need to check, Mr. Shen. I just saw it this morning. There are 2 invitations from the auction houses. One is a letter from the Jiada auction house in China and the other, well, it's a letter from the Tianai auction house in Jiangsu." Chen Wankai nodded and asked, "Show me both of them." Su Weikong bowed and left respectfully. After a while he held a folder in his hand, took out 2 beautiful invitations, and handed them to Chen Wankai with both hands. Chen Wankai took it and looked at it. He only glanced at Jiada's letter and threw it aside. As for the other one, he suddenly narrowed his eyes and laughed. The letter was accompanied by various pictures and materials of antiques and cultural relics that were about to be auctioned. Among them, a 3-legged purple gold cauldron was the most conspicuous. A row of big words was clearly marked on the top of the picture. "The antique world is shocked to discover the alchemy cauldron used by Sun Simiao, the medicine king of the Tang dynasty." Chen Wankai sneered and said, "The alchemy cauldron of Sun Simiao, the medicine king of the Tang dynasty? Are you kidding me? Such a thing is real, it would be a national treasure. How could it be auctioned?" Su Weikong whispered, "It said that it was discovered by a local villager in Mount Huangshan. It was hyped up in the news a while ago." Chen Wankai glanced at him and didn't say anything. He carefully read the information of the Medicine King tripod and fell into deep thought for a moment. He thought to himself, "This auction will be held in 2 days. I wonder if young Master Li has already applied for the auction?" Thinking of this, Chen Wankai turned his head and said to Su Weikong, "Go to the Tianai auction house and find out who the bidders are." Su Weikong hesitated for a moment and said, "This should be a trade secret, right? They won't disclose it, will they?" Chen Wankai sneered disdainfully and said, "Call them and tell them that I asked. Ask them to send a copy of the information. See if they will give it to you." Su Weikong nodded and walked out. After about 10 minutes, he came in with a few documents with a smile and said, "Mr. Shen, they have faxed the information of the bidders, but these are the ones who have applied for the qualifications of the bidders. There may not be any information for those who apply in the next 2 days." Chen Wankai took the information and glanced at it. Sure enough, he saw the names of Li Yundong and Zi Yuan on it. However, this time it was in the name of Zi Yuan, and in the name of the Linggong sect of Jingyi school. Li Yundong's name was after Zi Yuan's, and Zhou Qin's name was behind Li Yundong's. Chen Wansai's expression suddenly froze. He thought to himself, the eldest daughter of the Zhou family also participated in the bidding? With the strength of her family, it's impossible for her to fail. But Chen Wankai soon came to his senses. He thought to himself, by the way, it must be that Zhou Qin doesn't want to cause any trouble for Zhou Kachang, so she didn't use the connections and power of the Zhou family. Hey, this is a good opportunity. If young Master Li doesn't succeed in the bidding, and I succeed in the bidding, I will give this Medicine King tripod to young Master Li. That will be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. I will win the favor of young Master Li and flatter the daughter of the Zhou family. Ha, this is a good deal, absolutely a good deal. Since ancient times on the land of China, there was nothing that could make people rich more than the collusion between officials and businessmen. If he could make a connection with the Zhou clan and learn young Master Li's divine skills, it would be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. It was a matter of small capital and great profits. Chen Wankai laughed proudly. Su Weikong, who was beside him, asked, "Mr. Shen, what are you laughing at?" Chen Wankai chuckled and did not answer his question. Although Shen Wankai did not know much about the cultivation world, and he did not even know that there was a cultivation world around him, he suddenly felt that he seemed to have accidentally touched a huge and secret world with his keen sense of touch as a businessman. Chen Wankai slowly moved his eyes away from the information and looked at the page of the Medicine King tripod on the letter. He couldn't help but murmur softly, "So many people. Are they all here for this thing? What the hell is this?" What Chen Wankai didn't know was that because of this Medicine King tripod, the Chinese cultivation world and even the Japanese cultivation world was about to set off a terrible, terrible and earth-shaking wave. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.